In the quiet corners of history, there are stories that refuse to be forgotten, whispers of events so strange, so unsettling, that they challenge everything we know about the past. What if the unexplained mysteries buried in time are not just anomalies, but clues to something far greater? From ancient disappearances to bizarre rituals that defy logic, the boundaries between myth and reality blur, leaving us to wonder, what if we've missed something crucial? Tonight, we uncover 3 hours of history's most perplexing and haunting enigmas, puzzles that time itself may never solve. So sit back, relax, and let's dive into the unknown. In the dense forests of Gévaudan, a region in the south of France, a chilling mystery unfolds. The year is 1764, and the land is covered in thick woods that stretch for miles, their towering trees shrouded in a veil of mist. The silence here is almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant call of wildlife. But something darker stirs beneath this calm, something that would haunt the region for years to come. Over a span of 3 years, between 1764 and 1767, the people of Gévaudan were gripped by fear, terrorized by a creature that seemed to defy the laws of nature. Known simply as the Beast of Gévaudan, the attacks were as brutal as they were mysterious. At least 100 people were killed, many others wounded, and the beast's very existence has been debated ever since. Descriptions varied. Some spoke of a creature the size of a wolf, others of a larger, more terrifying monster with the body of a lion and the head of a wolf, or even something altogether more grotesque. Its eyes, some said, glowed with an unnatural fire, and its speed was unmatched by any known predator. As the attacks continued, the authorities took notice. King Louis XV sent hunters, soldiers, and even experts from across the country to track and kill the beast. Despite their best efforts, the creature eluded capture, moving through the dense forests with uncanny agility. Some reports suggested it could leap incredible distances. Others claimed it was impervious to the weapons used against it. In an attempt to explain the events, some local peasants and even royal officials insisted that the beast was not of this world, a supernatural entity sent to punish the people of Gévaudan. Others, including those who found solace in more grounded explanations, attributed the killings to a rogue wolf or a pack of wolves, perhaps driven by hunger or madness. But as the death toll mounted, even the most rational minds began to struggle with the facts. Wolves were known to exist in the region, but no pack had ever been so large or so relentless in its killing. No animal had ever been reported to act in such an eerie, organized manner. Theories began to emerge that the creature was something far more sinister, a gigantic hybrid bred for nefarious purposes, or perhaps even an escaped exotic animal from a foreign land. Some suggested the creature was the result of occult rituals, or that it was some kind of government experiment gone awry. Still others wondered if there might be a more human explanation. Was the beast simply a man, using the fear of a monstrous creature as a cover for a string of brutal murders? Despite the numerous hunters, even the famed Wolf King of the time, Jean Chastel, eventually managed to track and kill what was widely believed to be the Beast of Gévaudan. However, the mystery only deepened. The creature was killed, but questions remained. Was the beast truly the source of the terror, or was another, darker force still at work? Was the beast merely one of many, and its death only allowed others to take its place in the shadows of the forest? The official records state that the beast's killing was the end of the attacks, but many locals remained unconvinced, whispering that the true predator had simply gone into hiding. Some even believed that the beast had taken on a different form, slipping through the cracks of reality to continue its reign of terror in some other, more hidden place. More than 200 years later, the mystery of the Beast of Gévaudan endures. Skeptics argue that it was nothing more than a case of mass hysteria, fueled by superstition and fear. Others cling to the idea that something unknown, perhaps still lurking in the shadows of those same forests, has never been fully understood. Were the events simply the tragic result of a wild animal's predatory nature? Or were they a warning, a glimpse into something more? The bones of the beast were never fully recovered, and while some claim the mystery was solved with the death of one creature, the true nature of what hunted Gévaudan remains an open question. How could so many people have witnessed the same creature and yet failed to capture it? What dark forces might still lie in the forests of Gévaudan, waiting, silent, in the deepening mist? Only time may tell, if the answers are ever found at all. As the fog drifts across the misty streets of 18th century London, another mystery begins to take shape, one that seems to challenge the very fabric of reality itself. While the forests of Gévaudan were haunted by an elusive creature, England, just a few years earlier, would become home to something altogether different. A supernatural phenomenon that captivated the public imagination, sparked debates, and would continue to be discussed for centuries. The Cock Lane Ghost. Cock Lane, a narrow alleyway in the heart of London, was not an unfamiliar place. It was a quiet, somewhat ordinary part of the city, lined with modest homes and shops. But in 1762, its name would be forever linked with a story that blurred the lines between the known and the unknown. It all began in the home of a man named Richard Parsons, a clerk at St. Sepulchre's Church, and his wife, who lived on this unassuming street. Their quiet existence was about to be disrupted by an event that would stir the minds of both the public and the scientific community alike. It began with the tragic death of their daughter, Elizabeth Parsons, who, at the young age of 11, passed away under mysterious circumstances. Though her death was initially considered a simple misfortune, it was not long before reports of strange noises began to emanate from the house on Cock Lane. At first, these disturbances were subtle, a few odd knocks here and there, an occasional sound of something scraping against the walls. But soon, the noises grew louder, more persistent, as if something, or someone, was trying to make its presence known. Neighbors who came to investigate were struck by the eerie sounds they heard, describing them as knocks or raps that echoed through the house, in time with specific questions asked aloud. These noises seemed to come from nowhere, reverberating through the walls and floors as though a spirit was communicating from the beyond. The strange phenomenon continued night after night, sending waves of curiosity through the local community. Word spread quickly, and soon people gathered to witness the mysterious happenings for themselves. It wasn't long before a specific pattern emerged. Those present during these events began to notice that the rapping sounds seemed to respond directly to certain questions, and they became more pronounced when individuals asked about the fate of Elizabeth. As the phenomenon grew in intensity, the raps began to be interpreted as messages from the spirit of the young girl. The message was clear. Elizabeth, it seemed, was not at peace. The rapping noises became more specific. The sounds, it was said, would vary in intensity depending on the nature of the question asked. In some cases, they would respond with a single knock for a yes answer, 2 knocks for a no. But what truly sparked widespread interest was the claim that Elizabeth's ghost was attempting to reveal the identity of her murderer. For many, this was no ordinary haunting. Some believed that the spirit of the young girl was still trapped in the mortal world, desperate to communicate the truth of her untimely death. The story of Cock Lane began to gain widespread attention. Local spiritualists, religious leaders, and skeptics alike flocked to the Parsons home, eager to observe the spectral phenomena for themselves. Among them were prominent figures, including the famous writer and satirist Samuel Johnson, who attended one of the many public seances held to commune with the spirit. But as more and more people gathered, the mystery only deepened. Some speculated that the rapping sounds were the result of a trick or hoax. A few even suggested that it was a cleverly orchestrated scheme by Richard Parsons and his wife to capitalize on the public's fascination with the supernatural, potentially motivated by the desire for financial gain. Could it have been that the raps were simply caused by a hidden mechanism or someone in the house secretly tapping on the walls? But the evidence against such theories was compelling. Witnesses described the phenomenon as seemingly spontaneous, and at times occurring when no one was even near the walls. Others noted that the phenomenon occurred in the presence of multiple people, some of whom were staunch skeptics themselves. To add to the mystery, the apparition began to speak in a way that suggested Elizabeth's spirit had not been alone. It seemed as though the ghost of the young girl was being manipulated or even controlled by another presence, one far more sinister. A figure soon emerged in the tale, a man named William Kent, a former lover of the girl's mother. Kent had reportedly been a frequent visitor to the Parsons household, and his presence soon became a focal point in the unfolding drama. Was it possible that Kent had somehow been responsible for Elizabeth's death, and that her spirit was seeking justice from beyond the grave? As investigations continued, the story became even more twisted. The alleged ghost was believed to have been investigated and examined, but conflicting reports left the truth uncertain. Some observers claimed the rapping sounds were too deliberate, too complex to be attributed to natural causes or the actions of a living person. Others argued that the ghost was simply a figment of the imagination, brought on by the collective hysteria of the time. At the center of it all was the question that no one could seem to answer. Was the Cock Lane ghost truly a restless spirit trying to reveal a hidden crime? Or was it the product of human deception, hysteria, or psychological suggestion? In the years that followed, the phenomenon was largely dismissed as a hoax, though many still questioned whether the full truth had ever been revealed. And then there is the unsettling thought that haunts any investigation of the unknown. What if the truth behind the Cock Lane ghost is still hidden, locked away in the past, waiting for someone to uncover it? Could the spirit of Elizabeth, or perhaps something far darker, still be lurking in the shadows, waiting to make its presence known once again? The Cock Lane ghost remains one of England's most enduring mysteries, a story that continues to challenge the boundaries between belief and skepticism. In a world where the line between the natural and the supernatural is ever blurred, could there still be forces at work that we cannot fully comprehend? After the eerie occurrences on Cock Lane, we now shift our gaze to a vast and remote part of the world, far from the bustling streets of London, where an entirely different mystery unfolded, one that continues to elude definitive explanation to this day. The year is the late 1700s, and we find ourselves in the dense, fog-shrouded forests and coastal waters of the Pacific Northwest, a land of jagged cliffs and turbulent seas. Here, in the archipelago of Nootka Sound, a haunting disappearance would unfold, forever tied to the rugged beauty and mystery of this wild terrain. The Nootka Sound, located on the west coast of Vancouver Island, Canada, was a place where the natural world seemed to hold dominion. The sound itself, a deep inlet surrounded by towering evergreen trees and steep rocky shores, was a place of profound isolation. The wind carried the scent of salt water and moss, while the waters, often turbulent, crashed against the jagged coastline. It was a land as beautiful as it was inhospitable, where few ventured and fewer still made a mark. Yet, it was within these unforgiving waters and along its fog-laden shores that an unsettling mystery would unfold, a story that would remain unsolved, casting a long shadow over the region's history. The early European exploration of Nootka Sound in the late 18th century brought with it a tale of intrigue, misunderstanding, and loss. In 1778, the British explorer Captain James Cook arrived at Nootka Sound aboard the HMS Resolution, charting the coastline and establishing contact with the indigenous Nootka peoples who had long inhabited the area. What seemed like a promising moment for mutual exchange quickly soured as tensions between the native tribes and European explorers mounted. But the true mystery began to take shape in the years that followed Cook's initial visit, when a series of strange disappearances began to occur along the Sound's rugged shores. In 1789, the Spanish sent an expedition under the command of Don Juan Francisco de la Bodega y Quadra to further investigate the region, and by the following year, the first signs of something profoundly unsettling emerged. Several European ships that had docked in Nootka Sound went missing, their fates unknown. It was as though the sea had swallowed them whole, leaving no trace behind. The missing ships had been well maintained, their crews experienced, yet they vanished without a whisper. The most notable of these disappearances involved the Sutil and the Mexicana, two ships that had been sent to the region in search of further territorial claims. On March 22, 1792, the two vessels were last seen moored at Nootka Sound, where they had been conducting repairs. Then, as the days passed, they simply vanished. The crews were never heard from again, and no wreckage or remains were found in the surrounding waters. What happened to them? There were whispers that perhaps the Nootka had been involved in the disappearances. The indigenous people had long been skilled navigators and had developed their own complex systems of maritime trade and travel. Could there have been tension between the Europeans and the native peoples that escalated into violence? Were these disappearances the result of retaliation for the intrusion of outsiders into their land? However, there was another, more speculative theory that began to take root. Some suggested that the Sound itself might harbor a secret, something hidden beneath its placid surface, waiting to claim what ventured too far. The mist and fog that blanketed the region were notorious for disorienting travelers, and some believed that the unpredictable weather patterns and shifting tides could lead ships astray. Could the vessels have been caught in an unnatural storm, lost in the vastness of the Pacific, never to be found again? But the disappearance of ships was only part of the mystery. Over the next few years, additional reports surfaced of European explorers and traders simply vanishing without a trace. One of the most chilling accounts came in 1791, when a group of Spanish sailors, under the command of Lieutenant Francisco de Eliza, had gone to explore the Nootka Sound area. A short time later, they too disappeared without explanation, leaving behind only their abandoned camp and personal belongings. At the time, many speculated that the disappearances were the result of foul play. Some pointed to the Nootka tribes, accusing them of having attacked and killed the Europeans in retaliation for their encroachment on native land. Yet, there was no conclusive evidence to support this theory. Other explanations ranged from the possibility of mutiny among the crew members themselves to the idea that the Sound was cursed, or that some unknown natural force was responsible for the disappearances. With no survivors to offer first-hand accounts, the mystery only deepened. As time passed, the search for answers faded into history, yet the enigma of the Nootka Sound disappearances remained. Even today, the location is seen by some as a place of strange and unexplained phenomena, a place where the boundary between reality and the unknown seems to blur, where the shadows of the past still linger, obscured by the mists that roll in from the sea. What truly happened to the ships and their crews? Were they lost to the merciless tide of the ocean, or did something more sinister take place in those fog-bound waters? Were the native peoples of the area involved, or were they simply caught in the wake of foreign intrusions, their own stories and history forever entangled with those of the European explorers? Or perhaps, was the land itself responsible? An enigmatic and ancient force, older than any human civilization, claiming what it deemed its own? In the absence of definitive answers, The disappearances of Nootka Sound remain one of the Pacific Northwest's most enduring mysteries. Each year, new theories emerge, some grounded in history, others in speculation. But the true fate of those who vanished into the mist remains locked in time. And as the fog continues to roll over the dark waters, one must ask, what secrets still lie beneath the surface, hidden from view? What truths, perhaps long forgotten, could still be waiting to be uncovered in the depths of Nootka Sound? As the shadow of mystery continues to stretch across time and space, we now find ourselves in the early 19th century, deep in the heart of Tennessee, where a haunting tale would unfold, one that would captivate the American South and send ripples of fear and fascination across the nation. The year is 1817, and we arrive at a small log cabin on the edge of Red River, near the town of Adams, where a series of events would be recorded that defy rational explanation. This is the story of the Bell Witch haunting, a tale that still lingers in the dark corners of folklore, unexplained and unsettling. The Bell family, farmers by trade, had settled in this quiet part of Tennessee, far from the bustling cities, seeking a simple life. The cabin, nestled amid dense forests and rolling hills, was a peaceful setting for their farm, until something began to disturb their peace. It started with strange, unexplainable noises. At first, they were small sounds, almost imperceptible. The rustling of leaves when no wind blew, faint knocking or scratching against the walls of the house. But as time went on, these noises grew louder and more unnerving. It began to happen regularly. A disembodied voice echoing through the house, whispers in the night, a constant scratching, the sound of chains dragging across the floor. The Bell family initially tried to rationalize the disturbances. Perhaps it was an animal, a mischievous raccoon, or a wandering fox making its way through the walls, causing the noises. But as the days passed, the sounds intensified, becoming unmistakably human. It seemed as if the walls of the cabin were alive with something, or someone, that had no visible form. Then, the manifestations escalated. The haunting shifted from invisible noises to physical occurrences. Objects in the home began to move on their own. Chairs would be overturned, doors slammed shut without cause, and heavy furniture was pushed across the floor with no one touching it. And yet, perhaps the most unsettling aspect was the voice that began to speak directly to the Bell family. At first, the voice would whisper only in the darkness, but soon it grew bold. It spoke to John Bell, the patriarch, directly, with chilling clarity. The voice introduced itself as the Bell Witch, a spirit that claimed to have a particular interest in the family, particularly John. It seemed to know details of their lives that no one else could have known, revealing private matters and family secrets. As days turned into weeks, the entity's interactions with the Bell family grew increasingly aggressive. The spirit claimed to be the ghost of a woman named Kate Batts, a neighbor who had been at odds with John Bell. Kate had died years before the disturbances began, and her alleged connection to the haunting added an eerie layer to the unfolding events. But what was perhaps most bizarre was the nature of the Bell Witch's attacks. It wasn't just physical violence, though the spirit did at times throw objects, slap, and hit members of the Bell family, but also psychological torment. John Bell, the father, seemed to bear the brunt of the supernatural force's fury, suffering from unexplained illnesses that left him weak and bedridden. His health deteriorated rapidly, and it was widely believed that the Bell Witch had a direct hand in his declining condition. As the haunting continued, the Bell family was not alone in their suffering. The community around them began to take notice, and soon enough, a number of witnesses came forward, eager to experience the phenomenon for themselves. Among them were prominent figures, including a local preacher named James Gunn, who conducted multiple investigations into the strange occurrences. Despite his spiritual authority, even he was baffled by the events, witnessing strange phenomena firsthand that defied explanation. Spectral voices, disembodied laughter, and objects moving without human intervention were all documented by the witnesses, who recorded their observations with a mixture of fear and fascination. The Bell Witch seemed to taunt those who dared to intervene, throwing insults at them, challenging their courage, and even responding mockingly to their prayers. One of the most famous incidents occurred when the spirit claimed to be able to predict the arrival of people to the Bell House. As one witness later recounted, the spirit would name individuals who were about to knock at the door before they had even arrived, further cementing its eerie connection to the unknown. For years, the Bell Witch's reign of terror continued, but it was John Bell himself who would suffer the most. In 1820, after years of suffering at the hands of the entity, John Bell passed away under mysterious circumstances. His death was attributed to poisoning, but no conclusive evidence ever proved that he had been intentionally poisoned by anyone in the family. Some believed the Bell Witch had been responsible for his death, using some kind of supernatural means to slowly poison him over time. Others suggested that his death was a result of the stress and fear he had endured throughout the haunting. The Bell Witch's final act was the promise to return. Before the entity's activity ceased, it allegedly declared that it would one day return to haunt the Bell family again. And though the haunting ended after John Bell's death, the legacy of the Bell Witch persisted. The stories surrounding the events continued to circulate, and many still claim to have experienced the entity's presence in the years following. So, what was the Bell Witch? Was it the spirit of a scorned woman seeking revenge? Or was it something far more ancient and unknowable? Was it an elaborate hoax, an early example of mass hysteria and psychological manipulation? Or did the Bell family truly experience something supernatural, a force that could not be explained by reason or science? The mystery of the Bell Witch remains one of America's most enduring and chilling tales. While skeptics have pointed to logical explanations, such as the possibility of mental illness, hoaxes, or natural phenomena misinterpreted in the heat of fear, the fact remains that no one can definitively explain what happened on that small farm in Tennessee. The Bell Witch still lingers in the collective imagination, a spectral presence that challenges us to consider whether some mysteries may never be fully understood. In the years since, the Bell Witch has become an integral part of American folklore, inspiring books, movies, and countless investigations. But as time passes, the questions remain. Was there truly a supernatural force at work, or were the events simply the product of fear, imagination, and a troubled family? And if the Bell Witch did indeed haunt the Bell family, what other secrets might be hidden within the eerie silence of those woods, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them? As the eerie tale of the Bell Witch fades into the shadows of history, we move from the remote forests of Tennessee to a small, quiet town in southern Germany, Nuremberg, where a different kind of mystery emerged, one that would not only captivate the minds of those who witnessed it, but would continue to puzzle and fascinate for centuries to come. The year is 1828, and the streets of Nuremberg are a blend of old-world charm and modernity. But amidst this bustling city, a mysterious figure would appear, forever altering the course of history. His name was Kaspar Hauser. Kaspar Hauser's story begins on a cold morning in May of 1828, when a young man, appearing to be no more than 16 years old, stumbled into the center of Nuremberg. His clothes were ragged, his demeanor confused, and his eyes held a deep, almost unsettling mixture of innocence and fear. Kaspar's speech was limited, his movements awkward and uncoordinated, as though he had never before interacted with other people. He had no clear recollection of his past, no family, no home, and no understanding of the world around him. The only thing he could tell the authorities and the locals who gathered around him was that he had spent his life in a dark, solitary room, and that he had been kept there by a mysterious figure who never spoke to him. What Kaspar Hauser's appearance on that fateful day would lead to was a sequence of events that would confound the authorities, the people of Nuremberg, and historians ever since. He claimed to have been raised in isolation, deprived of human contact, unable to see daylight or hear human speech, and taught nothing about the world outside the confines of his prison-like environment. How had he come to be in Nuremberg? Who had kept him locked away for so long, and why had he been left to wander into the city, unprotected and vulnerable? Despite the obvious gaps in his knowledge and his strange behavior, Kaspar quickly attracted attention. People, from local townsfolk to scholars and even the royal family, became intrigued by this mysterious boy who appeared out of nowhere. What seemed like an ordinary case of a confused, disoriented child grew into something far stranger. Kaspar's puzzling behavior, combined with his claim of being held captive for most of his life, led some to speculate that he was a victim of an extraordinary and secretive plot, perhaps even the subject of a sinister conspiracy. Kaspar's backstory was unclear. According to his own words, he had been raised in a small, dark room with no human contact, fed only bread and water, and confined to a world where time seemed to stand still. He had no knowledge of basic human experiences. He didn't know how to walk properly. He had no idea how to speak clearly, and he could not even read or write. But his behavior was even more puzzling. Despite his severe isolation, Kaspar seemed to possess an unusual, almost otherworldly level of intelligence, picking up language quickly and expressing emotions in ways that seemed far beyond his years. Over time, more details began to emerge about Kaspar's life, though many of them seemed contradictory or even fantastical. Some claimed that he had been a member of the royal family, hidden away for reasons unknown, while others suggested he had been the victim of a cruel experiment. The story began to grow even stranger as Kaspar started to make occasional cryptic statements about his past. He spoke of a mysterious man who had kept him imprisoned, but the man's identity was never confirmed. Was this individual truly his captor, or was Kaspar merely the victim of his own tortured mind? Soon, the attention of the local authorities shifted from the strange boy to the possibility of a more sinister plot. Rumors spread that Kaspar Hauser was not simply an orphan or a victim of neglect, but that he might be part of a complex conspiracy, perhaps even a political maneuver aimed at creating a figurehead to rally around. Some suggested that Kaspar had been the lost heir to a throne, hidden away by rival factions in order to prevent him from inheriting power. Was he truly the child of nobility, or was his tale an elaborate fabrication? Despite extensive investigations into his background, no conclusive evidence emerged to explain how or why Kaspar had been imprisoned for so long. His true identity remained elusive, and the mystery of his origins deepened further. Various theories about his past emerged, some claiming he was the son of a noble family, others suggesting that he had been the product of a failed experiment, perhaps one involving extreme isolation to test the effects on a child's mind and behavior. Yet, with every theory, new questions emerged, and the truth seemed to slip further from grasp. Even as Kaspar adapted to life in Nuremberg, learning to read and write, he continued to exhibit strange behaviors that baffled those around him. His interactions with others were often awkward and unpredictable, and he seemed incapable of forming normal relationships. His isolation had left him socially unskilled, and his mind seemed to operate in ways that were difficult to understand. Could someone who had spent so many years in complete isolation ever fully integrate into society? And could Kaspar's bizarre and enigmatic behavior have been the result of long-term psychological damage? Or was there something more at play? The most chilling chapter of Kaspar Hauser's life came in 1829, when he was mysteriously attacked by an unknown assailant. One evening, as he was returning to his home in Nuremberg, Kaspar was stabbed in the neck. He survived the attack but was left gravely wounded, and once again, the questions multiplied. Was this a revenge attack, perhaps linked to his mysterious origins? Or was it part of a larger, ongoing conspiracy to silence him? The identity of his assailant was never discovered, and the attack only added to the growing sense that Kaspar's life was intricately woven into a puzzle no one could solve. Despite the growing intrigue and the media frenzy surrounding him, Kaspar Hauser's story would come to a tragic end in 1833, when he was found dead under even more suspicious circumstances. His death, like his life, remains shrouded in mystery. Was it an accident? Was he murdered? Or did he die from the consequences of years of mistreatment? As the investigations continued, the true nature of Kaspar Hauser's story seemed destined to remain unsolved. Was Kaspar Hauser the lost heir to a throne, hidden away by powerful forces to protect their own interests? Or was he simply a victim of a tragic and incomprehensible experiment, a boy whose mind had been forever altered by years of cruel isolation? Whatever the truth may be, his life remains a haunting and unanswered riddle, one that continues to stir the imaginations of those who study his case. To this day, Kaspar Hauser's identity and the mystery of his life and death remain unsolved, leaving behind only questions and theories, but no definitive answers. What could have led to the years of confinement, the cryptic messages, and the tragic end? And what secrets does the story of Kaspar Hauser still hold? Secrets that may never be uncovered? As the tale of Kaspar Hauser fades into the echoes of history, we turn our attention to another haunting mystery, one that emerges from the quiet, rural landscape of 19th century England. This story takes us to a time when the unexplained, whether rooted in superstition or genuine perplexity, could stir the imaginations of an entire population. The year is 1855, and it is in the village of Devon, on the southwest coast of England, that a peculiar and chilling phenomenon would unfold, one that would defy explanation, leaving behind only cryptic marks and lingering questions. This is the story of the Devil's Footprints. Imagine, if you will, the quiet countryside of Devon. The rolling hills are bathed in early morning fog, the quiet hum of life punctuated only by the occasional chirp of birds or the distant sound of a horse-drawn cart. In the cold stillness of winter, the snow-covered landscape stretches endlessly, its untouched surface unmarred by human foot or hoof. The villages, tucked away from the chaos of city life, appear serene and peaceful, almost idyllic in their isolation. Yet, it is in this calm, serene setting that a truly unsettling mystery would take root. In early February 1855, residents of the small village of Exminster and the surrounding area awoke to a bizarre and terrifying sight. Overnight, deep snow had blanketed the countryside, covering everything in a pristine layer of white. But as the villagers ventured outside the next morning, they discovered something that would forever alter their perception of the ordinary world. In the snow, stretching for miles, were a series of strange, distinct footprints that appeared to be from no animal, and certainly not from any human. The tracks were unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. They were roughly 4 to 5 inches in length, with a shape that seemed to resemble a cloven hoof, similar to the tracks one might associate with a goat or a devil. What made the tracks even more unsettling was that they were perfectly formed, despite the fact that they appeared in the thick snow, unbroken and uninterrupted. The footprints seemed to stretch across the landscape, crossing fields, climbing fences, and even making their way over rooftops. They seemed to go on endlessly, appearing in places that no human or animal could have possibly walked, leading some to speculate that these were the footprints of something otherworldly. The tracks were first discovered near the village of Exminster, but as word spread, similar footprints were reported across the surrounding area. In some places, the tracks seemed to form a path that stretched for miles, traversing villages, fields, and even crossing over rivers. No one could understand how this could be. The footprints appeared with an uncanny uniformity, as though they had been stamped into the snow by a singular, deliberate force. The sheer volume of tracks was staggering, and they appeared in places where no animal could have possibly traveled. There were no signs of struggle, no evidence of any creature leaving the tracks behind, just the unmistakable imprint of what appeared to be hooves. What was most unsettling about these mysterious marks, however, was the eerie way in which they seemed to appear and disappear without rhyme or reason. The tracks appeared out of nowhere, as if they had been made by something that materialized from thin air, leaving no trace of its presence behind. There were no other signs of a creature or person having traversed the landscape, no sign of the usual disarray that footprints often cause. The path of the tracks was unnervingly precise, as though whatever, or whoever, had left them behind had been in complete control of its movements. The mystery deepened when the tracks appeared to have been made in areas where no creature could have reasonably traveled. Some reports indicated that the footprints even appeared to go over fences, a feat that would be impossible for an animal without some form of assistance. Others said that the footprints appeared to go up the sides of buildings, leaving marks on rooftops as though something had climbed them. It was as if the creature that left them behind was capable of feats that defied the natural laws of physics. Local witnesses were terrified by the inexplicable nature of the phenomenon. Some people were quick to point to superstition, interpreting the strange marks as the work of a supernatural entity. The devil, they said, had walked the land, leaving his cloven hoofprints behind as a harbinger of something sinister. The connection between the tracks and the devil became a part of the local folklore almost immediately, and it wasn't long before people began to speculate on the cause of the mysterious event. But the devil's footprints were not universally accepted as supernatural. Many people offered more rational explanations, though none of them seemed to fully satisfy the public's curiosity. Some suggested that the prints could have been the work of a mischief-making animal, perhaps a goat or a large unknown creature, but this explanation was widely dismissed. Others wondered if the tracks could have been created by some form of human trickery, a deliberate hoax designed to spark fear and confusion. But the uniformity and precision of the tracks made this theory hard to believe. As the mystery continued to grow, various explanations were offered by experts in the field. Some suggested that the tracks could have been created by a rare and elusive animal, perhaps one that had never been seen before in England. Could there have been some strange creature living in the wilds of Devon, one that had left its mark on the snow? But again, no one could identify the source of the footprints. It seemed as though they came from a creature that defied logic and classification. Still, the more the tracks were studied, the stranger they became. Some speculated that the marks might have been the result of some atmospheric or natural phenomenon, such as a peculiar weather event that caused the snow to form strange patterns. Others pointed to the possibility of hallucination or mass hysteria. Could a collective psychological event have led people to see what they believed were supernatural marks? Despite the various theories, none of them seemed to explain the phenomenon in its entirety. As the days passed, the tracks began to disappear, buried under new snow or washed away by the rain. But the questions lingered. Who or what had left those marks behind? And why did they appear in such a precise, deliberate pattern, as if following an unknown path across the landscape? The mystery of the devil's footprints remains one of England's most enduring and unsettling paranormal phenomena. The tracks left behind were never fully explained, and despite extensive investigations, no definitive answer has ever been found. Whether they were the result of some supernatural force, a rare animal, or an elaborate hoax, the strange and eerie footprints left a lasting imprint on the collective consciousness of the time. What was the true origin of the devil's footprints? Was it the devil himself, leaving his mark on the land? Or something even stranger? Or were they the product of a mind searching for meaning in an event that could not be explained by conventional logic? The mystery remains unresolved, and as time passes, the footprints continue to haunt the landscape of history, an unsettling reminder that some questions may never have answers. What, if anything, still lingers in the snow, waiting to be discovered? As we leave behind the eerie silence of Devon's snow-covered landscape, we journey across the Atlantic to the remote countryside of Canada, where another chilling and perplexing mystery would unfold, one that seemed to defy all attempts at explanation and would linger in the annals of the unexplained for over a century. The year is 1878, and in the quiet town of Amherst, Nova Scotia, a haunting series of events would spark both fear and fascination, leaving behind an enigma that still captures the imagination to this day. This is the story of the Great Amherst Mystery. Amherst, a small town nestled along the Bay of Fundy in eastern Canada, might seem like an unlikely location for a tale of the supernatural. Its cobblestone streets, lined with modest homes and quiet farms, held the simplicity of rural life, a life untouched by the chaos of the larger world. In 1878, the town would have been a picture of serenity, its people going about their daily tasks, unaware that soon the very ground beneath their feet would become the stage for something far beyond their understanding. It all began in the spring of that year, when a young girl named Esther Cox, just 18 years old, began to experience strange and terrifying phenomena. Esther, who lived with her family in a modest house on the outskirts of Amherst, had always been a healthy, happy young woman, but soon her life would be altered by something that seemed entirely inexplicable. At first, it was just subtle occurrences, a rustling sound coming from the walls, objects mysteriously moving on their own, and doors creaking open when no one was near them. But it quickly escalated. Furniture was overturned, and strange sounds, loud thumping, knocking, and rattling, could be heard in the dead of night. The disturbances grew more intense, and Esther herself began to be affected in terrifying ways. At the height of the events, Esther would wake in the night to find herself violently shaken, as if an invisible force had gripped her body. Her family members, initially skeptical, soon found themselves witnesses to the strange occurrences. Objects were hurled across rooms, candles and furniture set ablaze without cause, and Esther's body would often move as if controlled by an unseen hand. The house was filled with an unnerving energy, and it wasn't long before Esther's terrified family sought help from local authorities. What followed was a series of investigations, some carried out by curious townsfolk, others by self-styled experts in the paranormal. Yet no one could explain what was happening. In one infamous incident, a local physician named Dr. D.C.H. McFarlane was called to examine Esther. He would later describe how, when he arrived at the house, he witnessed objects flying across the room, as though thrown by an unseen hand. He also reported hearing loud knocking sounds coming from within the walls. But despite his medical expertise, he could find no physical cause for the disturbances, nor any sign of illness that could account for Esther's bizarre behavior. As the events in the Cox household grew more intense, news of the strange happenings spread beyond Amherst. It wasn't long before paranormal investigators from all over the region flocked to the town, eager to witness the mystery firsthand. Some claimed that the disturbances were the result of a poltergeist, a malevolent spirit that caused objects to move and created violent outbursts. Others believed it to be a case of spiritual possession, where Esther was the unwilling vessel for a vengeful force. Some even suggested that the mysterious phenomenon was related to Esther's own mental health, perhaps a manifestation of her subconscious mind or an extreme case of hysteria. However, as time went on, no one theory seemed to fit all the facts. The disturbances continued unabated for months, with Esther often being the focal point of the unexplained phenomena. In one particularly unnerving episode, it was reported that Esther's body would become rigid, and she would speak in a strange, deep voice, uttering words that seemed foreign to her. In some instances, she would claim to be speaking to spirits, voices that could be heard by those around her but not traced to any visible source. The town's residents grew divided. Some believed that Esther was a victim of supernatural forces, while others saw her as nothing more than a victim of her own mind, a young woman under the strain of personal distress. Was she being haunted, or was something else at play? Despite the best efforts of local clergy, physicians, and investigators, no one could offer a satisfying explanation for the events. Some speculated that the disturbances were the result of a curse, perhaps linked to an ancient wrongdoing or an unfinished ritual. Others pointed to the possibility of psychological or emotional trauma, suggesting that Esther might have been manifesting her fears or inner turmoil in a way that her conscious mind could not control. But these explanations seemed inadequate given the sheer intensity of the phenomenon. How could anyone explain the objects thrown across rooms, the fires that started without cause, or the eerie, disembodied voices that filled the air? And why did it seem that Esther was at the center of it all? One theory that was floated during the investigation was that the source of the disturbances was tied to a specific event in Esther's life. A troubling history involving an alleged romantic entanglement and an argument with a family member had surfaced, leading some to speculate that unresolved emotions or guilt could have triggered the haunting. But even if emotional trauma was the cause, how could one explain the remarkable physical manifestations, the powerful force that seemed to invade the house? In the end, the disturbances came to a sudden halt. After several months of terror, the activity mysteriously ceased. Esther's family, exhausted and terrified, were left with more questions than answers. Esther herself, though never fully freed from the shadow of the event, went on to live a relatively quiet life, though she would later be haunted by the memories of what had transpired. The great Amherst mystery did not end with a clear conclusion. No definitive explanation was ever offered for the bizarre events that unfolded in that house. Was it the work of malevolent spirits, a case of mass hysteria, or perhaps something even more profound and unfathomable, a manifestation of forces beyond human understanding? Over time, the incident became a subject of much debate and speculation, a story retold in newspapers and books, passed down as part of the folklore of the region. Even today, the question remains: what happened to Esther Cox? Was she the victim of something supernatural, or was she simply a young woman caught in the grip of something far more complex, her own psyche, her emotions, or something hidden deep within the mysterious, uncharted corners of the human mind? The great Amherst mystery lingers, unresolved, leaving behind a haunting question that still echoes through the decades. What truly caused the events that shattered the peace of this small town? And what, if anything, remains hidden in the darkness of the unknown? After the lingering enigma of the great Amherst mystery fades into the shadows, we turn our attention to yet another bewildering case that defied reason and scientific understanding, this time to the heart of France, in the bustling city of Grenoble, where a peculiar and inexplicable phenomenon would unfold in the early 1840s. This is the story of the Electric Girl of Grenoble, a case that still perplexes researchers and historians to this day. Grenoble, nestled at the foot of the French Alps, is a city rich in history, surrounded by mountains and rivers that weave through the landscape like veins of ancient memory. In the early 19th century, it was a growing center of industry and science, with universities and intellectual circles that often grappled with the latest advancements in technology and medicine. However, amidst the intellectual fervor of this era, there arose a strange and inexplicable event, a mystery that, at the time, seemed to straddle the line between science and the supernatural. In the 1840s, a young girl named Frederique, whose true name has been largely obscured by history, became the focus of this peculiar mystery. According to reports, Frederique was a teenager from a humble family, and her case was first documented in 1846, when local physicians and scientists began to investigate her strange condition. The mystery surrounding her started with a simple observation that soon turned into something far more bizarre. She was, by all accounts, an ordinary girl, living an unremarkable life in a town that had seen little of the extraordinary. But soon, a series of strange electrical phenomena would begin to follow her wherever she went. It began with reports that Frederique's body had begun to exhibit strange electrical properties. When she came into contact with objects, especially metals, they would sometimes spark or light up in ways that seemed impossible. The girl herself would feel an unusual sensation of electricity coursing through her, as though she were somehow charged, like a living conduit of some unseen force. Those who came into close contact with her, including family members and physicians, would often describe a sensation of being shocked or jolted, as though an invisible force was interacting with them. In one instance, a doctor, upon touching her, was reportedly sent into convulsions, unable to explain the powerful sensation that ran through his body. Some even claimed to witness sparks fly from her hands, as if she were a living source of static electricity. The girl, meanwhile, seemed neither fearful nor in control of these occurrences. She simply seemed to live with them. As word of her strange affliction spread, the curiosity of scientists, doctors, and even the general public grew. Was this merely a case of some unknown illness or a hysterical condition? Or was there something more extraordinary at play? Reports from the time suggest that various experts, physicians, engineers, and physicists, came to Grenoble to investigate, offering their own theories to explain the phenomenon. Some posited that Frederique's condition was related to an overactive nervous system, a kind of hysteria that could cause electrical sensations in the body. Others, particularly those more in tune with the rapidly evolving field of electricity and magnetism, speculated that she might have been an unusually sensitive subject to electrical fields, her body somehow generating a charge in the same way a static balloon might. But despite these rational explanations, the accounts of the people who witnessed the phenomena suggested something that defied simple medical reasoning. The descriptions of Frederique's abilities, of objects levitating or sparking, of shocks that seemed to emanate from her skin, and of the sheer intensity of the electricity she could generate, were too consistent to be dismissed as mere coincidence or mass hysteria. Even skeptics of the time, who were usually quick to offer plausible scientific explanations, were forced to admit that something strange was happening. In one particularly baffling episode, Frederique reportedly caused a small metallic object to levitate when she placed her hand near it. Onlookers, shocked and incredulous, were left to wonder how a teenage girl could exert such power over the natural world. Some speculated that her physical state was somehow linked to the local electrical fields, that the girl might have been unusually sensitive to the fluctuating energies of the earth itself. Still, there was no definitive answer, only a growing sense of awe and fear. For a time, Frederique's condition garnered the attention of local newspapers, who printed stories of her strange affliction. As more and more people visited her to witness the phenomena firsthand, her reputation spread far beyond Grenoble, capturing the imaginations of people across France. Some began to believe that she was not merely a victim of electrical forces, but that she might be a rare and powerful being, perhaps even one with the ability to manipulate these forces at will. Was she some kind of human battery, capable of generating energy in a way that was still entirely beyond human comprehension? But with all the attention came scrutiny, and soon, the once enthusiastic physicians and scientists who had eagerly examined Frederique began to grow wary. Theories began to shift from the possibility of a physical ailment to more speculative ideas about the girl's unusual abilities. In some circles, whispers began to circulate that Frederique's condition was not simply a random accident of nature, but was somehow tied to more esoteric forces, perhaps even of a supernatural origin. Could it be that she was the recipient of some ancient curse, or a strange and rare gift passed down through her family line? As the months passed, Frederique's condition seemed to stabilize somewhat, but the strange phenomena continued sporadically. She was still reported to emit electricity from her body, though the events became less frequent and more difficult to verify. In the years that followed, Frederique would largely fade from public attention, and many of the details of her life, what became of her after the events in Grenoble, remain unclear. Some say that she was eventually treated by a local healer, or that she simply moved away from the town, her mystery unsolved. Others have suggested that she was lost to history entirely, with no further accounts of her or her unusual condition. To this day, the mystery of the Electric Girl of Grenoble remains unsolved. Was she truly a human conduit for electrical energy, as some suggest? Was there something inherently extraordinary about her physiology, or could there be a far more mundane explanation, a series of coincidences or psychological phenomena that caused people to attribute electrical properties to her? Some argue that her case was an early example of the kind of phenomena we would later come to understand with the development of modern science, particularly in the fields of bioelectricity and electromagnetism. Could Frederique have simply been experiencing some form of electrostatic discharge, or a psychological condition that caused people to perceive her actions in a fantastical light? Yet, even with these theories, the questions remain. How could a young girl, without any known training or knowledge, have produced such intense electrical phenomena? And why were so many witnesses so deeply affected by her presence? The Electric Girl of Grenoble remains a mystery that straddles the line between the scientific and the supernatural, a case that challenges our understanding of the human body and its relationship to the unseen forces that govern the world around us. Was Frederique truly a living battery, or is there something more at play here, something that has yet to be fully explained? Perhaps the answer lies hidden in the unexplored realms of science, or, as so many mysteries of the past, just beyond our current understanding. As the phenomena of Frederique and Grenoble fades into the backdrop of history, we find ourselves sailing through time to the open seas, where another mystery unfolds, one that has gripped the imagination of sailors, scientists, and the curious alike for centuries. Imagine, if you will, the vast expanse of the ocean, its surface a shifting, endless canvas, broken only by the distant horizon and a deep, mysterious world beneath that holds secrets beyond human comprehension. The year is the 1800s, and from the waves of the Atlantic to the icy waters of the North Sea, a strange and persistent wave of sightings began to make its way across the globe. A wave that would spark curiosity, fear, and debate. This is the story of the sea serpent sightings. During the 19th century, reports of sea serpents, enormous, snake-like creatures seen in the waters of oceans and seas across the world, seemed to surface with a frequency that was impossible to ignore. Sailors, explorers, and fishermen from diverse parts of the globe reported seeing massive, undulating creatures, often described with long, serpentine bodies and numerous fins or humps that cut through the water. The creatures were often said to be at least 20 to 30 feet long, sometimes longer, and would emerge from the water with terrifying speed and power. The sheer volume of these sightings, some of which were meticulously recorded, suggested that something unusual was happening, even if no one could explain exactly what it was. It began in the early part of the century. One of the earliest and most well-documented reports came from the waters off Norway in 1808. Several sailors aboard a ship had been navigating the frigid waters when they saw what they described as a creature rising from the sea. It was not like any whale or fish they had ever encountered, but rather something larger, with a series of humps that seemed to break the surface of the water. The sailors, frightened but captivated, watched as the creature moved with an unnatural grace before disappearing beneath the waves. Soon after, similar reports began to surface from other parts of the world, each detailing the same basic description of a long, serpentine creature. The sightings continued through the 19th century, with a flurry of reports coming from ships and sailors traveling in the North Sea, the Mediterranean, and even the coasts of the United States. Each report seemed to describe a creature that was slightly different in detail, yet the core elements remained strikingly similar. A long, sinuous body, often segmented into humps, large eyes, and sometimes even the appearance of a head or fin-like features. The creature was always seen emerging from the deep, sometimes rising high above the water, and often moving with astonishing speed. In one famous report from 1848, sailors on the HMS Daedalus off the coast of the Azores claimed to have witnessed a creature they described as a sea serpent, with an undulating dark body that appeared to be at least 100 feet long. The creature was said to have moved rapidly through the water, leaving a wake of bubbles and foam in its wake before vanishing below the surface. As the sightings spread across the globe, some began to speculate on what these creatures could be. Were they simply a myth, the product of overactive imaginations and superstition, or was there something more to the reports? The sheer consistency of the accounts, many of which came from highly experienced sailors, scientists, and military personnel, made it difficult to dismiss the phenomenon outright. In many ways, the sea serpent sightings fit perfectly within the framework of the era's fascination with the unknown. The 1800s were a time of great exploration, when the natural world was still largely a mystery to many. New species were being discovered on land and in the sea, and the oceans themselves were still viewed as vast, uncharted realms teeming with secrets. Could the sea serpents have been one of these secrets? A creature that had long evaded discovery, perhaps living deep in the uncharted waters of the oceans? Some naturalists and scientists of the time suggested that the sea serpents could be unknown species of large marine animals, perhaps giant eels, serpentine fish, or even large unclassified whales. One theory proposed that the creatures were simply misidentified marine animals. Perhaps the long bodies and humps described by the witnesses were actually the dorsal fins of whales or schools of fish swimming in a particular pattern. Another theory suggested that the creatures could have been large species of sea snakes, such as the hydrophis species, which have been known to inhabit warm waters and can grow to impressive lengths. But even with these theories, there remained inconsistencies. The descriptions of the creatures didn't always match known species of marine animals. Some witnesses spoke of the creature's speed and agility, far beyond what could be explained by known marine life. Then there were the more speculative theories. Some suggested that these sightings were the result of a collective myth or mass hysteria. Could it be that sailors, isolated in the vastness of the ocean, were experiencing a shared hallucination or delusion? This idea wasn't without merit, particularly in an era where long voyages could take sailors far from land for months at a time, with only the endless sea to keep them company. Exhaustion, stress, and isolation could certainly have contributed to unusual perceptions. Yet the number of sightings and the consistency of descriptions across distant parts of the world seemed to defy the notion of a mere delusion. Others were less inclined to dismiss the possibility of something truly extraordinary lurking beneath the waves. The sea, after all, is a vast and largely unexplored frontier, and new species are constantly being discovered in its depths. Perhaps the sea serpent was a creature that, while it may not conform to the classical depictions of mythological beasts, was an undiscovered species, a remnant from a time long past, surviving in remote and hidden corners of the world. Could such a creature, somehow, have escaped the scrutiny of modern science? As the 19th century progressed, the sightings continued, though they slowly faded from public attention. By the early 20th century, advances in oceanography, the growth of modern shipping, and an increasing understanding of marine biology led many to dismiss the idea of sea serpents altogether. The stories, once part of the fabric of maritime culture, began to be viewed more as folklore than fact. And yet, despite the decline in reports, there were still occasional sightings in the 20th century, each one adding another layer to the mystery, but never quite resolving it. Today, the sea serpent sightings remain one of history's enduring mysteries. No definitive evidence has ever been found to prove the existence of these creatures, and the scientific community has largely dismissed them as either exaggerated accounts or simple misidentifications of marine animals. Yet the sheer volume of reports, many from credible and experienced witnesses, still lingers in the mind. Was there ever a creature beneath the waves that inspired such tales? Or were the sightings nothing more than the result of a collective myth, a phenomenon that, like many mysteries, slipped through the cracks of understanding, forever eluding the grasp of rational explanation? As we reflect on the sea serpents of the 1800s, we are left to ponder: are there creatures still out there, hidden in the deep, whose very existence continues to escape us? Or have these sea serpents simply become a part of the vast, uncharted depths of human imagination, as boundless and mysterious as the oceans themselves? The truth, perhaps, remains buried beneath the waves, waiting for a new generation of explorers to unlock its secrets. As the mysteries of the sea serpents and their elusive existence fade into the depths of maritime folklore, we journey to the shores of the American South, where a chilling story arose from the quiet streets of Pascagoula, Mississippi, in the late 1800s. In a region known more for its soft, humid breezes and vast marshlands than for its paranormal occurrences, the tale of the Phantom Barber would soon stir unease in the hearts of the town's residents. This is the story of an unsettling mystery that would not only intrigue but terrorize a community, and leave behind a lingering question: who or what was behind the strange happenings in Pascagoula? The town of Pascagoula, nestled along the Gulf Coast in the southeastern corner of Mississippi, was a small, sleepy community in the 1890s. The landscape was marked by sprawling cotton fields, winding rivers, and dense forests that seemed to encircle the town. The air was thick with the scent of salt water and pine, and the sound of cicadas hummed relentlessly in the summer heat. Life moved at a slow pace here, untouched by the greater world's turbulence, yet beneath the stillness, something strange was quietly unfolding. It began in the summer of 1894, when the first whispers of a bizarre series of events began to make their way through the town. A seemingly ordinary evening would mark the beginning of what would come to be known as the Phantom Barber of Pascagoula. The story began with a young woman whose name, like so many of the other witnesses, has been lost to time. She had woken up to find a shocking sight. Her long, dark hair had been cut off while she slept. The young woman was understandably confused and frightened. How could this have happened? She hadn't heard a sound. No intruder had entered her home, and yet her hair, still warm and intact, had been neatly severed, with strands scattered across the pillow. In a town where such occurrences were unheard of, the mystery quickly turned into a source of fear. Was it some prankster, perhaps a mischievous neighbor or some local troublemaker? But as more reports began to surface, it became clear that this was no random act. The hair of other women in Pascagoula, often those who lived in proximity to each other, was also being cut in the same manner. Some claimed their hair was trimmed while they slept. Others found it slashed without explanation. The consistency of the reports, each detailing similar circumstances, left the town's residents puzzled and increasingly uneasy. Who, or what, was behind these disturbing acts? As the days turned into weeks, the pattern of haircutting continued, and the phenomenon gained more attention. The press began to pick up on the mysterious events, and soon the term Phantom Barber was coined to describe the unseen figure who was causing such distress in Pascagoula. Authorities were called in to investigate, but nothing of substance was found. There were no footprints leading to or from the homes of the victims. No sign of forced entry, no disturbance, no trace of anyone having been there at all. The only evidence left behind were the freshly cut locks of hair, sometimes found on the floor, sometimes placed with eerie precision by the bedside. The mystery deepened. Several theories were proposed to explain the Phantom Barber's actions. Some suggested that the perpetrator was a local man with a strange fixation on women's hair, perhaps a recluse or an obsessive who had developed a bizarre compulsion. Others speculated that the acts were the work of a person who was familiar with the victims, someone who might have been able to enter their homes undetected. But even this idea raised more questions than answers. How could someone move so silently through a house in the dead of night, undetected by even the lightest sleeper? And why only hair? Why this singular obsession with cutting it, with no other sign of physical harm or intent? As the mystery deepened, it became clear that the Phantom Barber wasn't just a simple criminal or prankster. The eerie lack of evidence and the precision with which the hair was cut suggested something more strange, and perhaps more unsettling, was at play. Some began to speculate that the Phantom Barber was not a person at all, but something far more mysterious. Was it a supernatural presence? An unseen force that manifested itself only to torment the women of Pascagoula? Could the haircutting be some form of ritual, a cryptic act that defied explanation? In an era that was still grappling with the ideas of spiritualism and the occult, the possibility of a supernatural explanation wasn't as far-fetched as it might seem today. The fear that spread throughout Pascagoula was palpable. Women locked their doors at night, fearful of the figure who seemed to slip in and out of their homes with eerie stealth. Families kept vigil, hoping to catch a glimpse of the perpetrator, but the Phantom Barber remained elusive. No one ever saw him, or her, directly. The only clue that persisted was the hair, and even that seemed to vanish with the dawn. As quickly as the sightings had begun, they started to taper off, and by the late 1890s, the Phantom Barber seemingly disappeared as mysteriously as they had arrived. Yet, despite the passage of time, the mystery of the Phantom Barber of Pascagoula remains unsolved. Was it a person, a criminal who simply vanished from the public eye? Could it have been someone who, over time, grew tired of the game, or was discovered and silenced before they could be brought to justice? Or was it something else entirely? A lingering presence, a supernatural force, or perhaps even a community-wide manifestation of collective fear and imagination? One of the most intriguing aspects of the Phantom Barber mystery is the absence of any conclusive evidence. No one was ever caught, no culprit ever identified. And though the phenomenon has become part of Pascagoula's local lore, the true nature of the events remains unclear. Were the hair-cutting incidents simply a bizarre series of pranks, or did something more unsettling and unexplainable occur in the small, sleepy town? The accounts of frightened residents, the careful documentation of the phenomenon in local newspapers, and the eerie consistency of the acts all suggest that something remarkable happened. But no answers were ever found. Could there be an explanation that has simply been lost to time? Or does the Phantom Barber remain a symbol of the unknown, a reminder that some mysteries may be forever beyond our grasp? Perhaps the answers lie in the overlooked details, in the unspoken fears of the people who lived through it. Or perhaps, as with so many of history's unexplained mysteries, the truth lies buried in the shadows, waiting for someone brave enough to bring it into the light once more. As we leave Pascagoula behind, one question lingers. What was it that caused the Phantom Barber to appear, and why did they disappear just as suddenly? Could there be more to this mystery than we realize, something that remains hidden just beneath the surface waiting to be uncovered? As we leave behind the unsettling mystery of the Phantom Barber in Pascagoula, We turn our gaze across the sea to a remote and desolate outpost on the wild and windswept Flannan Isles, located off the rugged coast of Scotland. It is here, on a craggy rock in the North Atlantic, that one of the most haunting disappearances in lighthouse history took place. An event that would puzzle investigators for generations to come, and whose eerie silence continues to reverberate in the annals of maritime mystery. The Flannan Isles themselves are little more than a group of windswept islets, barren and stark, where the only signs of life come from seabirds, the occasional passing ship, and the towering lighthouse that sits like a solitary sentinel over the treacherous waters below. The lighthouse, built in 1899, was perched atop a jagged outcrop, providing a vital beacon for ships navigating the dark and often perilous waters of the Atlantic Ocean. With its towering stone structure and remote location, it was a place that demanded vigilance, where the keepers of the light lived a life of isolation, exposed to the fierce elements of nature. It was on the night of December 15, 1900, that the quiet routine of the lighthouse was shattered. The disappearance of the three lighthouse keepers, Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur, remains one of the most enduring mysteries of the sea. When a routine relief ship arrived at the Flannan Isles lighthouse on December 26th, nearly 2 weeks after the last reported sighting of the men, they found the lighthouse eerily silent. The light had gone out, and the three men were nowhere to be found. At first, it seemed like an ordinary case of forgetfulness or neglect, a simple lapse in procedure. Perhaps the men had become ill or had wandered off, taken by the overwhelming isolation of the islands. But as the search began, things quickly took a much more unsettling turn. When the relief crew made their way up to the lighthouse, they found the building in perfect order. The furnishings were undisturbed. The meal that had been prepared for the keepers was still warm on the table. But most chilling of all were the small details that suggested something had gone wrong, something far more mysterious than anyone could have imagined. The men's personal belongings were found, but some things seemed out of place. The coats and hats of the keepers had been left behind, despite the fierce winds and freezing temperatures that often swept the island. It seemed as though the men had disappeared into thin air, vanishing without a trace. The lighthouse logbook provided the most cryptic clue. The final entry, made by the lighthouse keeper Thomas Marshall on December 15th, noted strange occurrences. The weather had turned foul, the winds had risen to an unusual intensity, and Marshall mentioned that the men had been feeling an overwhelming sense of unease. He wrote that something strange had happened, and that the lamps went out, and we were not able to relight them. The entries in the logbook would be the last recorded words of the keepers, and no further explanation was ever found. The investigation into their disappearance was extensive, but it turned up few answers. It was determined that the weather had been particularly stormy in the days leading up to the men's disappearance, but no storm had been reported in the area for the days that followed. The lighthouse should have remained lit, as it was manned around the clock, and yet it was dark, a beacon gone cold. Was it simply a matter of human error? A miscommunication? An accident? Or did something else occur? Something unexplainable, perhaps even supernatural? One of the more widely speculated theories was that the men had fallen victim to the fierce weather conditions. The Flannan Isles are notorious for their wild, unpredictable storms, and it was assumed that the keepers may have ventured out to check the lighthouse during a particularly violent tempest, perhaps in an attempt to secure the light or address a mechanical failure, only to be swept away by the waves. But the fact that their coats and personal items were left behind suggested that they had not left the lighthouse willingly. Moreover, the calmness of the logbook entries seemed to rule out the idea of panic or sudden disaster. Some proposed a more mysterious explanation, the possibility of a supernatural occurrence. Given the remote location of the lighthouse and the eerie stillness of the island, rumors quickly spread that the men had encountered something inexplicable, perhaps a ghostly presence, or a strange force that compelled them to vanish. This theory gained further traction when tales from other lighthouse keepers began to surface, recounting strange experiences of feeling watched or hearing inexplicable noises late at night. Could the men have been victims of a force beyond their understanding, something that drew them out into the sea or to the cliffs in the dead of night? Another theory suggested that the men may have been victims of foul play. Perhaps one of the keepers had gone mad, or there had been a confrontation among them. But no signs of violence were found at the lighthouse, and no evidence suggested that any of the men had been harmed. The idea of foul play seemed to unravel in the face of the calmness of the scene. The strangest part of the mystery, however, lay in the lighthouse itself. Though the men had disappeared, the structure remained as it always had. The lamp, the very symbol of their work, had gone out, but there was no explanation for why. Some suggested that the men had somehow neglected their duties, or that a mechanical failure had rendered the lamp useless. But this theory too seemed to falter in light of the men's experience and their close attention to their work. It was unlikely that they would have allowed the lamp to extinguish under normal circumstances. Over the years, many explanations have been offered to account for the men's disappearance. Some speculate that they were victims of an enormous wave, swept away in an instant. Others suggest that the men may have left the lighthouse to seek shelter from the storm, only to fall victim to the rough terrain of the islands. But with no bodies ever found and no definitive explanation, the mystery remains a tantalizing riddle, inviting further speculation and endless questions. Today, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse stands as a solitary testament to the men who once tended its light, a monument to those who vanished without a trace. Some say their spirits linger on the wind, still searching for answers in the desolate isolation of the island. Others wonder whether something else, something more profound, keeps the mystery alive. The disappearance of the Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers remains unsolved, and as with so many stories of the unknown, it is left to the imagination to fill in the gaps. Did the men succumb to the merciless sea, or did they vanish into a world that defies our understanding? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, is it possible that the lighthouse itself, with its beams of light cutting through the darkness, holds secrets that are yet to be discovered? Secrets that might explain what happened on that cold December night? As we shift from the eerie silence of the Flannan Isles, we step into the foggy streets of Victorian London. One of the most chilling and enduring mysteries in history awaits us. The year is 1888, and the scene is Whitechapel, an impoverished district of London, where the dark alleys and narrow passageways seem to harbor far more than just the daily struggles of the working poor. Beneath the gaslight, among the constant hum of industry and the cries of the destitute, something far more sinister moved. It was here, in these dimly lit streets, that a figure emerged. One whose name would become etched into the annals of history, whose identity would forever elude those who searched for him. The figure of Jack the Ripper. Whitechapel was no stranger to crime, yet the murders that began in the late summer of 1888 were unlike any the area had ever seen before. The first victim, Mary Ann Nichols, was discovered early on the morning of August 31st. Her body, discarded in the street, bore the unmistakable signs of brutal violence. Her throat was slashed, and her abdomen mutilated with a chilling precision that suggested the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. But it wasn't just the nature of the crime that set it apart. It was the fact that, just days later, another victim would be found in the same gruesome manner. On September 8th, Annie Chapman's body was discovered in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, just a short distance from the first murder. Her throat had been slit, her body similarly mutilated. The similarities between the two cases were impossible to ignore, but what followed next would deepen the mystery to an unfathomable level. In the same week, the killer struck again, this time in the dead of night, leaving behind two bodies. Elizabeth Stride was found in an alley, her throat cut, but the body showed no further mutilations. Yet mere minutes later, another woman, Catherine Eddowes, was found in Mitre Square. Her injuries were far more disturbing. Her throat was slit, and her abdomen ripped open. The level of brutality escalated with each killing. By this point, the media had already begun to take notice, and the press began to refer to the killer as Jack the Ripper, a name that would echo down the centuries. What made these murders so different from any other in London at the time? The brutality was unmatched, but what truly set them apart was the manner in which they were committed. The killer was not hasty. He was deliberate, methodical. There was a disturbing calmness to his actions. He struck quickly, then disappeared into the dark streets of Whitechapel, evading capture time and time again. It was this elusiveness, coupled with the terrifying nature of the killings, that stirred something deeply primal in the people of London. Fear spread like wildfire. The killer was not just a murderer. He was a specter that haunted the very streets. In the weeks that followed, the police made frantic attempts to catch the killer. Theories about his identity ranged from the plausible to the outrageous. Some speculated that the killer was a local man, someone familiar with the district and its residents, able to slip in and out of the shadows without drawing attention. Others, influenced by the surgical nature of the mutilations, suggested that the killer might have had some medical knowledge, perhaps a doctor or a butcher with an unsettling appetite for violence. Was the killer a man who moved through the fog of Whitechapel unnoticed? Perhaps a person whose face was never seen by anyone? Or was he someone hiding in plain sight, his outward appearance deceiving all who encountered him? Some even suggested that the Ripper might have been a woman, one driven by a dark and twisted compulsion. Others speculated that the killer was not alone, that perhaps a larger conspiracy was at work. Was Jack the Ripper part of some sinister society? Was there more to his actions than anyone had yet understood? The media frenzy surrounding the murders only fueled the growing myth of Jack the Ripper. As the killer's reputation grew, so did the mystery surrounding him. Letters began to appear, some purportedly from the killer himself, taunting the police and the public for their failure to capture him. One of the most famous of these letters, the From Hell letter, claimed to have come from the killer and contained a gruesome gift, a piece of human kidney said to have been taken from Catherine Eddowes. Though the authenticity of the letters remains in question, they added an eerie layer to the already disturbing series of events. But despite the best efforts of the police and the increasing public outcry, Jack the Ripper eluded capture. By the end of November 1888, the murders had ceased, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. Was the killer dead? Had he been arrested for another crime? Or had he simply vanished, disappearing into the shadows of London, never to strike again? Theories abound about Jack the Ripper's identity. Some believe he was a local man, driven to murder by a deep-seated hatred of women. Others suggest that he was a member of the upper class, hiding in plain sight while the police were distracted by the poor and powerless. Still, others claim that Jack the Ripper was part of a larger conspiracy, his murders a twisted act of vengeance or ritual. But no matter how many theories emerge, one thing remains certain. The true identity of Jack the Ripper is still unknown. As time has passed, the fascination with Jack the Ripper has only grown. Each year, new theories emerge, and experts continue to sift through the same old evidence in search of answers. The question remains, what drove him to kill? Was it the result of a deep psychological condition, a sadistic desire for power, or something darker still? The fact that so much time has passed without closure only adds to the allure of the case. Could Jack the Ripper have been a symbol of the darker sides of Victorian society, a figure that mirrored the growing fears and tensions of the age? Or was he simply a man, a human being with no larger motive than his own need for violence? In the years following the Ripper's reign of terror, the media would continue to exploit the mystery. Stories of the killer's identity appeared in newspapers and pamphlets, each new theory taking root in the public consciousness. But the mystery never seemed to reach its conclusion. Some theorists suggest that Jack the Ripper was never caught because he had simply slipped through the cracks of Victorian law enforcement. The police at the time had little in the way of modern forensic techniques, relying on witness testimonies and outdated investigative methods. Could the killer have been in plain sight, a victim of the ignorance and limitations of the time? Furthermore, the idea that Jack the Ripper may have continued killing elsewhere after the Whitechapel murders remains an intriguing possibility. Various unsolved killings in other parts of London, and even abroad, have been linked to the infamous figure. Could the Ripper have moved on to other cities, or even left England entirely? The possibility that the killer's actions were not confined to Whitechapel raises even more disturbing questions. Was he a serial killer with an insatiable thirst for blood, or was he part of a wider, more insidious pattern of violence that went unnoticed? While modern forensic techniques have provided more insight into many cold cases, the Jack the Ripper murders remain a particularly elusive enigma. DNA analysis, fingerprinting, and other advances in criminal investigations have allowed law enforcement to solve crimes long after they've gone cold. Yet, the search for Jack the Ripper continues to resist closure. Are there pieces of evidence that have yet to be discovered? Are there clues hidden in plain sight, locked away in archives or private collections, waiting for someone to unlock their secret? Ultimately, Jack the Ripper remains an enigma, an unsettling specter that haunts the streets of Whitechapel, leaving behind a legacy of fear, fascination, and unanswered questions. With each passing year, the hunt for his true identity continues, drawing in new generations of detectives, historians, and amateur sleuths who hope to shed light on the shadowy figure who terrorized London. Will the truth ever come to light? Or is the mystery destined to linger forever in the darkness, just as it always has? Perhaps the most chilling aspect of Jack the Ripper's story is that it may be a mystery that was never meant to be solved, leaving us with more questions than answers, and the uneasy feeling that some mysteries are better left unsolved. As we leave behind the shadowy streets of Whitechapel and the lingering fear of Jack the Ripper, we now find ourselves in the quiet, unassuming town of Fall River, Massachusetts. It's a place where the thick scent of history still hangs in the air, and the whispers of a century-old mystery continue to ripple through the walls of the once stately Borden house. The year is 1892, and though it may seem a far cry from the fog-choked alleys of London, a chilling and equally baffling story is about to unfold, a tale that will captivate the nation and leave the world wondering, who killed Andrew and Abby Borden? The Borden family home, situated at 92 2nd Street, was an ordinary two-story house in a middle-class neighborhood. Yet, on the fateful morning of August 4th, 1892, it would become the scene of a crime so grotesque and mysterious that it would echo through American history. Inside this house, Andrew Borden, a wealthy but not well-liked businessman, was found hacked to death in the living room. His wife, Abby, was discovered upstairs, her body similarly mutilated. Both had been struck multiple times with an axe, their brutal murders suggesting a level of rage and ferocity that demanded an explanation. At the heart of this grisly case stood Lizzie Borden, Andrew's 32-year-old daughter. Lizzie, a prim and proper woman in the eyes of the public, seemed an unlikely suspect. Yet, the evidence, or rather the lack of evidence, only deepened the mystery. No one saw her commit the crime, and no weapon was found at the scene, though an axe was later identified as the most likely tool of death. The police had a handful of puzzling clues, but they were far from definitive. What they lacked, however, was a clear motive and a solid witness, leaving the case shrouded in suspicion and suspicion alone. As the investigation unfolded, Lizzie's behavior became more suspicious in the eyes of the authorities. She was reportedly found laughing and carefree the day after the murders, even as the police scoured her home and questioned her. Her testimony was vague and inconsistent, adding to the sense of unease. Lizzie claimed to have been in the barn at the time of the murders, but there was no evidence to support her story. She maintained that she had heard nothing and had seen no one suspicious enter the house, but there were questions that no one could easily answer. If Lizzie was in the barn, then why was the upstairs bedroom locked from the inside? How had the murderer entered and left the house without anyone noticing? The Borden case captivated the nation, and soon, Lizzie Borden's name became synonymous with crime. She was eventually arrested, tried, and, after a sensational trial that lasted several weeks, acquitted by a jury of her peers. The mystery of who killed Andrew and Abby Borden, however, was far from resolved. Lizzie's innocence, or guilt, remains a topic of debate to this day. Some have suggested that Lizzie was motivated by financial gain, as she stood to inherit her father's fortune. Others believe that there was a more complicated emotional undercurrent at play, citing Lizzie's tense relationship with her stepmother Abby and the strained atmosphere within the household. Andrew Borden was a notoriously tight-fisted man, and some have speculated that the Borden family's finances, which were not as secure as they appeared, played a role in the murders. Perhaps Lizzie's anger and resentment toward her father's strict, puritanical ways had been simmering for years, leading to an explosion of violence. Yet, the most perplexing aspect of the case remains the lack of clear evidence and the absence of a clear motive. No one can say for certain what happened in that house on that summer morning. Could Lizzie have been the victim of a societal misunderstanding? Was she a woman trapped in a restrictive, judgmental society, driven to madness by the pressure and resentment of her upbringing? Or did someone else have a hand in the deaths of Andrew and Abby Borden, someone who never came to light? Theories abound, some more plausible than others. Could Lizzie have had an accomplice, or was she alone in her gruesome task? Some have even suggested that Lizzie was a victim of her own troubled mind, driven by the suppressed emotions of a life filled with repression, grief, and control. Could it be that she was, as some have suggested, simply a woman at her breaking point, her mind unraveling after years of torment? There are even fringe theories that question whether the killer was actually Lizzie at all, suggesting that the murders were the work of an outsider, possibly even a malevolent presence who had worked with malicious intent. Could there have been an unknown third party involved? And if Lizzie was innocent, then why was she arrested in the first place? What would explain the bizarre and contradictory evidence that seemed to point both toward her guilt and toward her innocence? The trial was an event of national spectacle, and despite her acquittal, Lizzie's life was never the same. She and her sister Emma continued to live in Fall River for several years, but the scandal would forever haunt Lizzie. She became a social pariah, ostracized by her community, and even the house that had once been the site of such wealth and privilege was sold. Lizzie spent the rest of her life in seclusion, always under the shadow of the crime that had so defined her existence. In the years following the trial, the case of Lizzie Borden would become one of the most debated and dissected criminal mysteries in American history. Was Lizzie Borden guilty? Or was she simply the victim of a series of unfortunate circumstances? Was the truth hidden behind the closed doors of the Borden house, waiting to be uncovered? Or, as many have suggested, did the true answer lie somewhere far darker, an answer that, perhaps, we will never know? The Lizzie Borden case remains one of those rare and haunting mysteries that refuses to fade away. For over a century, the question of her involvement has lingered, and as time passes, the answers continue to elude us. Did Lizzie Borden take an axe and strike down her father and stepmother, or was she the victim of a wrongful accusation? The truth may never be fully known, but it's a mystery that will forever captivate our imaginations and challenge our perceptions of justice, truth and guilt. As we continue to sift through the shadows of history, Lizzie Borden's story remains one of those enduring enigmas, a puzzle that refuses to be solved, a mystery that, in the end, may never be fully understood. As the whispers of the Borden mystery fade into history, we now turn our attention to a much larger enigma, one that took place not in a modest home in Fall River, but in the heart of the Siberian wilderness, where the earth itself seemed to tremble in response to an event of unimaginable scale. The year was 1908, and the place was remote, isolated, and largely unexplored. In this barren landscape of pine forests and rugged terrain, the Tunguska event would occur, a phenomenon that would both astound and baffle the world for decades to come. On the morning of June 30th, 1908, something happened in the skies over Siberia that would forever change our understanding of nature's raw power. At approximately 7:14 a.m., an explosion of tremendous force erupted in the sky. It was not a thunderclap nor a simple fire, but something far more extraordinary. Witnesses miles away described a massive flash of light, as if the sky had been split open, followed by an earth-shaking blast that knocked people off their feet and shattered windows hundreds of miles away. The blast was so powerful that it flattened over 2,000 square kilometers of forest, an area larger than the city of London itself. At first, there were no clear answers. No impact crater was found, no trail of destruction that could immediately explain the source of this incredible event. What had caused such a powerful explosion in a region where no signs of human habitation existed? The mystery deepened as investigators from around the world began to search for clues. They found evidence of a tremendous force. Trees were felled, charred, and scorched, yet there was no clear evidence of fire. The land seemed to have been struck, but by what? The only indication that something had entered the atmosphere was the unusual concentration of radiation found in the area, though it was brief and scattered. Mainstream scientific explanations began to form, suggesting that the Tunguska event was likely caused by the explosion of a comet or asteroid in the Earth's atmosphere. According to this theory, a celestial body, perhaps no larger than a small car, had entered the Earth's atmosphere and exploded in a massive airburst. The blast would have released energy equal to hundreds of times the force of the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. This theory, while plausible, still left some crucial questions unanswered. If this was a celestial body, why had no remnants been found? Where were the meteorites or fragments from the supposed impact? The mystery deepened further when no direct casualties were reported, despite the vast area of destruction. Although 3 people are believed to have died from the explosion, the vast region affected by the blast was sparsely populated, and the lack of immediate fatalities seemed to defy the scale of the explosion. If a celestial body had exploded overhead, why had it not left behind any trace, any remnants of its passage through Earth's atmosphere? Some theorists suggested that the explosion had been so powerful that it had vaporized any remaining pieces of the object before they could reach the ground. Yet the mystery of Tunguska is far from confined to just celestial explanations. Over the years, fringe theories have gained traction, adding layers of intrigue to an already perplexing event. Some have posited that the explosion was not the result of a comet or asteroid, but rather a secret experiment gone wrong, one of the many unverified theories that claim early 20th century science and technology were capable of testing weapons of unimaginable power. Could it have been a test of a new kind of weapon, one so powerful that it destroyed its intended target in an instant, leaving nothing behind? Others have speculated that the Tunguska event could have been caused by the phenomenon of ball lightning, an extremely rare and poorly understood event in which electrical energy forms into a visible sphere. However, ball lightning typically doesn't generate the type of explosive force observed in Siberia, and this theory, though intriguing, falls short of explaining the scale of the blast. More fantastical theories have been proposed as well. Some suggest that the event was caused by a collision with a miniature black hole or even an alien spacecraft. The latter, although highly speculative, reflects the way in which the Tunguska event has captured the imagination of people around the world. Could it have been a visit from extraterrestrials? Or was it something even more mysterious, a cosmic phenomenon we don't yet understand? Another theory, popular among those interested in paranormal and unexplained phenomena, ties the Tunguska event to the ancient beliefs of certain cultures. Some claim that the event marked a cosmic reckoning, a message or warning from the heavens, or even a rift in space-time itself. Could the Earth have briefly been exposed to something far beyond the scope of conventional science? Could there have been forces at work that we have yet to comprehend? Despite these many theories, one thing remains clear. The Tunguska event represents one of the most puzzling, unexplained phenomena of the 20th century. Decades after the explosion, scientists still debate its cause, and while the most accepted explanation, an airburst of a comet or asteroid, remains the leading theory, the lack of physical evidence and the unexplained nature of the event continue to fuel speculation. Perhaps the most disconcerting aspect of the Tunguska event is not the explosion itself, but the unanswered questions that surround it. How can an event of such magnitude occur in the modern age of exploration and technology without leaving behind solid, irrefutable evidence? Why, in an era where we can track objects in space with incredible accuracy, were there no definitive warnings or signs of an impending cosmic collision? What does this event tell us about the limits of our knowledge? Are there still forces in the universe beyond our understanding? Forces capable of wreaking unimaginable destruction, yet leaving no clear trace behind? Even as science continues to explore and analyze the Tunguska event, the true nature of what happened that summer morning remains elusive. Did the Earth narrowly avoid a catastrophic collision with an object from space? Or was it something more mysterious, a phenomenon we have yet to fully understand? As the years pass, the Tunguska event remains a haunting reminder of how much we still have to learn about our own planet, the universe, and the strange and powerful forces that govern them. The Tunguska event remains a paradox, one that continues to inspire both wonder and fear. In the end, it leaves us with one simple but haunting question. What else might be out there just beyond our grasp, waiting to reveal itself? As we move away from the ghostly mystery of Tunguska, our journey takes us closer to the chilling waters of the Pacific, where nature's fury would leave its mark on human history. The year is 1906, and the sun sets over the cold, unforgiving coastline of British Columbia. The restless ocean crashes against the jagged cliffs of Vancouver Island, a dramatic and dangerous landscape that has long been both a barrier and a gateway for seafarers. But on a cold January night, it was not the peaceful beauty of the sea that called to the passengers aboard the SS Valencia. It was the violent power of a storm that would push the ship and its crew into a deadly, uncharted fate. The Valencia was an aging passenger steamer, carrying a mix of passengers, crew, and freight along the treacherous coastline between Vancouver and Seattle. On January 22, 1906, it set sail from the city of Seattle, bound for Victoria, British Columbia. The ship's journey began as any other, but as it approached the Strait of Juan de Fuca, the weather rapidly deteriorated. What began as a typical winter storm quickly escalated into something far more deadly, a ferocious, gale-force storm that made navigation nearly impossible. Winds howled, waves rose to towering heights, and the once familiar coastline became a blur of gray and white. Despite warnings and the rapidly worsening conditions, the Valencia continued on course. It was an unfortunate choice, driven in part by the ship's desire to make up time and the pressure to maintain its schedule. The crew had little choice but to navigate blind, with little more than their instincts and outdated maps to guide them through the night. What followed next would soon become one of the most infamous maritime disasters in North American history. As the storm raged on, the Valencia veered off course, and its captain, perhaps overwhelmed by the storm's intensity, lost his bearings. The ship became hopelessly stranded on the rocks of a dangerous part of the coastline, known as the Valencia Shoals, just off the coast of Vancouver Island. The ship struck hard, its hull splitting open, and within moments, the Valencia began to sink into the icy waters. But this wasn't the end of the story. The disaster was only just beginning. The Valencia was ill-equipped for such a catastrophe. The lifeboats were inadequate, and many of them became impossible to launch due to the rough seas. Panic and confusion spread among the passengers, and the cries for help echoed over the howling wind. Yet help would not arrive in time. In the aftermath of the sinking, only 37 people survived from the 108 aboard. The bodies of many victims were never recovered, lost to the depths of the ocean, while others washed ashore in the following weeks, an eerie testament to the power of nature's unpredictability. But the disaster did not end with the final sinking of the Valencia. In the days that followed, as the storm subsided and rescuers arrived, the true extent of the mystery began to unfold. Despite the best efforts of the Canadian and American authorities, the exact number of lives lost in the disaster remained uncertain. Many bodies were never found, and reports of strange happenings in the aftermath of the tragedy persisted. Local fishermen spoke of hearing strange sounds emanating from the wreck site long after the storm had passed, as if the ship's spirit had not yet given up on the passengers it had failed to save. Could these accounts have been the product of wild imaginations stirred by grief and trauma? Or was there something more to the legend of the Valencia? The wreck itself became a focal point for years of investigation, with maritime experts and investigators trying to uncover the true cause of the disaster. While the weather played a major role, other theories began to emerge about the Valencia's fate. Some speculated that the ship had been cursed, a tragic end for a vessel that had survived many storms, but ultimately succumbed to one it could not conquer. Others wondered if the Valencia had been poorly designed for the conditions it faced, with the ship's hull not strong enough to withstand the storm's fury. In more speculative circles, conspiracy theories arose. Was the sinking part of a larger mystery involving the Canadian Pacific Railway, which owned the ship? Was it possible that someone on board had intentionally steered the vessel off course to cause a disaster? There was even talk of a hidden treasure being aboard the ship, though there is no evidence to support this claim. Did the Valencia carry secrets, whether literal or metaphorical, that went beyond the simple tragedy of its sinking? Despite these theories, the Valencia tragedy has remained shrouded in mystery. No matter the explanations offered over the years, there remains one undeniable truth. The Valencia was an unfortunate victim of forces beyond its control. The storm, its fierce unpredictability, and the ship's own misfortune combined to create a catastrophe of profound proportions. For those who survived, the memories of the sinking would haunt them for the rest of their lives. And for those left behind, the loss of loved ones on that cold, unforgiving coast would remain an open wound that would never heal. The Valencia disaster, though largely forgotten by the public today, serves as a chilling reminder of the dangers of the sea and the mystery of fate itself. The wreck of the Valencia was eventually rediscovered in 1910, but by then, the mystery had already begun to fade into history. Over the years, the site became a point of pilgrimage for those with a fascination for the shipwreck or a connection to the lost passengers. But the deeper questions about why the Valencia sank and why so many lives were lost still linger. Could it have been avoided? Was there something more sinister at play? Was the ship doomed from the start? The Valencia disaster, much like other haunting tragedies throughout history, remains a mystery wrapped in time and uncertainty. Even today, there are those who speculate about the unexplained phenomena surrounding the sinking. Could there have been factors that no one yet understands, an unseen hand guiding events toward a tragic end? Or was it simply the convergence of human error and the relentless power of nature? As we continue our exploration of history's most baffling mysteries, we are left to wonder, how many other stories remain hidden beneath the waves, waiting to be uncovered? How many other shipwrecks, each with their own secrets, lie just beyond the reach of our understanding, waiting to reveal their truths? In the case of the Valencia, perhaps it is the unanswered questions that will continue to haunt us for years to come. As we move away from the eerie waters of the Valencia, our journey now takes us south, deep into the heart of Mexico, where another haunting mystery unfolded at the edge of the 20th century. The year is 1913, and the land is caught in the throes of revolution. Across the rugged hills and deserts, soldiers and revolutionaries clash under the weight of a changing world. But amid this turbulence, there is one mystery that still lingers in the shadows, one that remains as elusive as the man at its center. Ambrose Bierce, a man of contradictions, was no stranger to the dark corners of the human psyche. He had spent much of his life observing and recording the horrors of war, earning a reputation as one of America's most daring and sardonic writers. His works, such as The Devil's Dictionary and An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, reflected his deep cynicism and fascination with the darker sides of life, death, and the human condition. Bierce, a veteran of the Civil War, was known for his sharp wit, his unflinching approach to the grotesque, and his ability to expose the absurdities of life in his writing. Yet, despite his success as a writer, Bierce's own life remained shadowed by an aura of mystery. Born in 1842 in Ohio, he had lived a life marked by personal tragedies, including the untimely death of his sons and his own growing disillusionment with the world. As his writings grew darker, so too did his outlook on life, culminating in an inexplicable departure from his comfortable life in the United States. In the years leading up to 1913, Bierce had grown restless. His disillusionment with the world around him had deepened, and rumors of his desire to visit the front lines of the Mexican Revolution began to circulate. It was a tumultuous time. Mexican society was torn apart by war, with the forces of Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata clashing against the government forces of General Victoriano Huerta. Despite being in his 70s, Bierce announced his intention to travel to Mexico, seeking to observe the revolution firsthand, perhaps in search of some deeper truth. What would possess a man of Bierce's age, with his sharp intellect and awareness of the dangers that lay ahead, to enter such a volatile and perilous situation? Was he, as some suggested, motivated by a desire to capture the essence of a society in upheaval? Or was there something more personal driving him, something that led him to throw himself into the chaos of a war that had already claimed so many lives? On or around December 26, 1913, Bierce wrote his final letter, a short, uncharacteristically simple note to his friend, the journalist W.H.H. Llewellyn. In it, he mentioned that he was setting off to join the revolutionary forces, but that he would not be gone long. He had no particular plans for his return, yet he left behind the curious impression that something about his journey was already predetermined. The letter concluded with Bierce's cryptic comment, "Goodbye." His disappearance soon became a matter of public intrigue. It was not long after that he was last seen leaving the town of Ojinaga, Mexico, on a journey to meet with the revolutionaries. But after that, Bierce vanished. There were no more letters, no more signs of life. He simply disappeared into the dusty, war-torn landscape of northern Mexico, leaving nothing behind but speculation and unanswered questions. The mystery surrounding Bierce's disappearance quickly captured the public imagination. Was it possible that he had been captured or killed in the chaos of the revolution? Some suggested that Bierce had met his end at the hands of Mexican soldiers or bandits, an unfortunate victim of the violence that consumed the country. Yet, there was no definitive evidence to support such claims, and no body was ever found. Theories about his fate began to flourish. Some claimed that Bierce had been betrayed by those he had trusted, while others suggested that he had succumbed to the dangers of the harsh Mexican terrain. There were even rumors that he had been assassinated by a revolutionary faction, silenced for reasons that remained unclear. His friends and family clung to the hope that Bierce had simply walked away from the world, choosing to disappear into obscurity, as he had hinted at in his last letter. Could it be that, after a lifetime spent confronting the darkness of human nature, Bierce had sought to make his final departure on his own terms? Then, there were those who took a more fantastical view of his disappearance. In the years following his vanishing, rumors spread that Bierce had staged his death in order to escape the confines of society and live out his final years in secrecy. Some even suggested that he had faked his own death to join the revolutionaries in a remote corner of Mexico, taking on a new identity. Had Bierce, the master of the macabre, simply found his own final perfect story? Yet another theory emerged, one that was both chilling and deeply compelling. According to some, Bierce may have chosen to end his life on his own terms, succumbing to the same dark forces that had shaped so much of his writing. The idea that Bierce, weary of the world and disillusioned by the violence around him, may have chosen to vanish into the desert to die alone, in the style of one of his own tragic characters, seemed to fit the narrative of his life. Perhaps the most intriguing theory, however, was that Bierce had encountered something far more inexplicable in Mexico. Some suggested that he had stumbled upon a hidden world, one that had driven him to madness, or worse. Could it be that Bierce, like so many of his fictional characters, had crossed the boundary between reality and the unknown, becoming a part of some supernatural mystery? Despite all the theories and speculation, no one has ever been able to say with certainty what happened to Ambrose Bierce. His fate remains a puzzle, one of the great unsolved mysteries in American literary history. Was he captured by rebels or killed by a chance encounter with violence? Did he simply choose to disappear? Or did he, as some suggest, become another victim of the very war he had sought to understand? In the end, we are left with more questions than answers. As we look back on his life and the final days before his disappearance, we are reminded of the very nature of mystery itself. It often resists explanation, leaving us to wonder whether some truths are simply beyond our reach. Bierce's disappearance, much like his writing, is a testament to the dark complexity of the human experience, an experience that we may never fully understand, no matter how much we seek to uncover its secrets. What, after all, could have driven such a man to disappear into the night, leaving behind only a trail of shadow and enigma? Was it a final act of defiance, a rejection of the world he had spent so long observing? Or was it something far darker, something we may never truly comprehend? Ambrose Bierce may have vanished into history, but the mystery surrounding his fate remains alive, waiting to be explored by those willing to confront the unknown. As we move from the troubled disappearances of Ambrose Bierce to another unsettling chapter in the annals of American mystery, we find ourselves in the small town of Mattoon, Illinois, in the early days of the 20th century. The year is 1944, though the full story began years earlier, when strange and inexplicable events began to rattle the peaceful town. The mystery we now turn to is one that has remained unsolved for decades, its shadow lingering long after the last reported incident. This is the story of the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. Imagine, if you will, a small, quiet town in the Midwestern United States. Mattoon, a place where life moves slowly, the daily rhythm of the community punctuated by the hum of daily routines. This is the kind of place where nothing out of the ordinary would be expected to happen. It was, on the surface, a typical American town, a safe haven for families, farmers, and workers. And yet, in the summer months of 1944, something deeply disturbing began to unfold, shattering the veneer of everyday life. Reports of strange and horrifying incidents began to trickle in. In the late evening hours, residents started to feel a sense of unease. At first, it was subtle, a faint, strange smell in the air, described by those who encountered it as similar to that of sweet almonds or chloroform. But the smell was not the only oddity. Those who inhaled it began to experience bizarre symptoms: dizziness, nausea, headaches, and an intense feeling of paralysis. The symptoms would fade after a short period of time, but the fear and confusion it caused lingered long after. It began innocuously enough. One woman, Violet Roberts, claimed to have been affected by the strange smell while sitting in her home. Her condition worsened rapidly, and she fainted, unable to move or cry for help. When she regained consciousness, she had no memory of what had happened. She, like others who experienced similar symptoms, was left with nothing but the overwhelming sensation that something or someone was lurking in the shadows, ready to strike again. As the days passed, more and more reports came in. Residents claimed to have seen a figure, sometimes described as a man in a gas mask, lurking in alleyways or creeping near their homes under the cover of darkness. The figure would vanish before anyone could confront him, leaving behind only the mysterious, suffocating smell and the victims who had been left in a stupor. The unknown figure quickly became known as the Mad Gasser of Mattoon, a faceless, elusive figure whose presence seemed to haunt the town like a nightmare. At first, the authorities were skeptical. Could it be that the people of Mattoon were simply experiencing mass hysteria? The symptoms, after all, were vague and varied, and the smell itself was difficult to track. Some even suggested that it was simply the result of natural gas leaks or other common household odors. But as more and more individuals came forward with eerily similar stories, the question began to shift. Was there truly a gasser out there, someone with malicious intent? And if so, what was the motive? Despite the growing fear, the Mad Gasser remained elusive. No physical evidence was ever found, no trace of gas, no signs of forced entry or any visible presence of an intruder. Some believed that the gas was released from outside the house, while others speculated that the person responsible was sneaking in through unlocked windows or doors. But even with the various theories, the true identity of the gasser remained frustratingly unknown. As weeks turned into months, the terror in Mattoon escalated. The reports of strange attacks, though inconsistent and sometimes hard to verify, seemed to follow a distinct pattern. They occurred during the late evening or early morning hours, often in neighborhoods near one another. The victims were primarily women, though men and children were not exempt. The attacks also seemed to target families living in isolation, often with the windows left ajar or open, perfect entry points for someone seeking to poison the air. What motivated this unknown figure? What drove him or her to target innocent people in this way? Was there a twisted rationale behind the attacks? Or was the gasser simply a person with a thirst for chaos? Some suggested that the attacks were nothing more than a sadistic thrill for the gasser. Perhaps the power of controlling others' fear and suffering was enough to satisfy his or her desires. Others pointed to the psychological impact. The gas seemed to incapacitate its victims long enough to leave them helpless, heightening the terror. As fear mounted, the people of Mattoon began to act out of desperation. Neighbors watched each other's homes, groups of residents armed themselves, and the local authorities intensified their patrols. But despite their efforts, the Mad Gasser continued to slip through their fingers. Some people even began to look inward, questioning whether the mysterious events were, in fact, a product of their own imaginations. Was the gasser real? Or had mass hysteria taken hold of the town? Was the strange gas a figment of the collective mind, amplified by the stress of wartime anxiety, local unrest, and rumors? Then, in the autumn of 1944, the reports seemed to stop. The attacks, if indeed they were ever truly happening, appeared to have ceased without warning. The town of Mattoon began to breathe a collective sigh of relief. But the mystery did not end there. Though the gassing incidents tapered off, the question of who, or what, was responsible remained. Was the Mad Gasser of Mattoon an actual person? Or was it a construct of fear and suspicion? And if it was a person, why did they stop? Theories continued to circulate long after the incident stopped. Was the Gasser someone driven by a deep-seated vendetta, targeting certain families or individuals? Or was it something far more disconcerting, a series of pranks, a copycat, or a figment of collective paranoia? Some even wondered if the Gasser had been a woman, perhaps a member of the community herself, working alone or with others, seeking to inflict terror for reasons unknown. Though the Mad Gasser was never caught, the legacy of his or her actions has lived on in the folklore and history of Mattoon. The mystery remains unsolved, not just because the Gasser was never found, but because of the lasting effect those terrifying nights had on the psyche of the town. What happened in Mattoon? Was it truly a case of malicious intent, or something born from fear itself? And so, the story of the Mad Gasser lingers, fading into the realm of the unexplained. No matter how many years pass, the memory of the gas-filled nights, the fear of an unseen figure, and the unresolved questions will continue to haunt those who look back. Could it happen again, in a world so much more connected and aware? Or does the shadow of the Mad Gasser belong to a past that we cannot fully grasp, leaving us to wonder what might still be hidden in the dark recesses of the human mind? As we shift our gaze away from the strange occurrences in Mattoon, we find ourselves venturing into the heart of the Gulf of Mexico, where another mystery waits to be unraveled, a mystery that has intrigued sailors, cartographers, and conspiracy theorists alike for centuries. The location is Bermeja Island, a place that, according to many historical maps, should exist. Yet, as we will soon discover, the island has vanished from the world's geography. The tale of Bermeja Island's disappearance is not just one of an uncharted landmass. It's a story wrapped in uncertainty, with a sense of eerie ambiguity that still stirs the imagination to this day. Imagine, if you will, the vast expanse of the Gulf of Mexico, the sun dipping low in the sky and casting a golden light over the tranquil waters. The Gulf is a body of water known for its mystery and its history, teeming with stories of shipwrecks, treasures, and disappearances. But it's not just the waters themselves that hold secrets. It's also the islands that dot the horizon, or, in some cases, the islands that no longer seem to exist at all. One of these vanished islands was Bermeja. Bermeja Island first appeared on European maps as early as the 16th century. The earliest known mention of it dates back to the 1500s when Spanish explorers recorded its existence as a small, rocky landmass located approximately 100 miles off the coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. Its presence was confirmed on various maps over the years, and it became a fixture in nautical navigation for centuries. The island, according to early descriptions, was about a mile in length, uninhabited, and located in an area that was rich in marine life and resources, an ideal landmark for sailors and explorers. Yet, despite its consistent appearance on maps, something curious began to unfold as the centuries passed. As more and more ships sailed through the Gulf, and as more modern navigational technologies were introduced, Bermeja Island seemed to disappear. In the 19th century, during the age of accurate surveying and mapping, efforts were made to pinpoint the island's location, but it was nowhere to be found. In fact, by the late 1800s, cartographers began to notice that Bermeja Island had gradually faded from the official maps. How could an island that had once been so clearly marked on so many charts just vanish? The first attempts to locate Bermeja were made by the Mexican government in the late 1800s. At the time, the island was strategically important. Its location, if it truly existed, could potentially extend Mexico's territorial claims in the Gulf of Mexico. But when a survey was conducted by the Mexican Navy in 1880, they were unable to find any trace of it. Further searches in the early 1900s yielded the same result. No island, no landmass, not even a speck of rock to mark where Bermeja had once been. This disappearance raised many questions. Could Bermeja have simply been a mirage, an island imagined by early explorers who misinterpreted their observations? Or was it something more? Was there a natural explanation for its disappearance? Perhaps an earthquake, a shifting of tectonic plates, or the rising sea levels that could have submerged it completely? Or more provocatively, was there something more sinister at play? Theories about Bermeja's disappearance quickly took root, and the mystery only deepened as the years went by. Some believe that the island never truly existed, that it was a mistake on early maps, perhaps a misidentification of another landmass or a cartographer's error. If the island had been a mere mistake, it would explain why no trace of it could be found later. However, the sheer number of historical records referencing the island makes this explanation less convincing for many. Another theory proposes that Bermeja Island was indeed real but became submerged due to a natural disaster. Earthquakes or volcanic activity in the region could have caused the island to sink beneath the waves, disappearing from view. While the Gulf of Mexico is not known for active volcanism, the area is tectonically active, and it's not out of the question that an undersea earthquake could have caused such an event. There's also the possibility that Bermeja Island was destroyed or hidden deliberately, perhaps by human intervention. This theory suggests that the island's disappearance might have been the result of a covert military or political operation. During the 20th century, Bermeja's location was particularly important due to its potential role in establishing maritime boundaries. If Mexico had laid claim to the island, it would have extended its control over a vast section of the Gulf, potentially rich in oil reserves. Some speculate that Bermeja was purposefully erased from maps by individuals or nations who stood to gain from its absence. The idea of a deliberate cover-up, hidden in plain sight, adds an air of intrigue to an already puzzling mystery. The most intriguing aspect of the Bermeja Island disappearance is that, to this day, no conclusive explanation has emerged. While we may never know for certain what happened to the island, the theories and the questions that remain open have led to a growing sense of unease among those who have tried to solve the riddle. If Bermeja did indeed exist, how could it have simply vanished from existence, unnoticed by so many generations of explorers and cartographers? One of the more recent developments in the story of Bermeja came in 2009, when a group of researchers suggested that the island may have been lost to rising sea levels, something which is becoming an increasing reality due to climate change. However, no new evidence has surfaced that can definitively confirm or deny this theory, and it remains a speculative idea rather than a proven fact. Furthermore, despite numerous attempts to locate it, modern technology, satellite imagery, sonar mapping, and underwater exploration has failed to reveal any traces of Bermeja. The Gulf of Mexico is one of the most thoroughly studied bodies of water in the world, and the fact that Bermeja has never been found in the locations where it was once marked is, in itself, a mystery. So, what remains of Bermeja Island? Was it a figment of early explorers' imaginations? Was it a natural disaster that erased it from the map? Or was its disappearance part of something far more intricate and deliberate, perhaps even connected to geopolitical games or secrets long buried beneath the surface of history? As we leave the Gulf of Mexico, the ghost of Bermeja Island lingers, a reminder of the many mysteries that remain hidden in the depths of the ocean and in the pages of history's forgotten maps. We may never find definitive answers, But the unanswered questions surrounding Bermeja will continue to beckon us into the unknown, inviting us to wonder what secrets are still left to uncover. Some have suggested that the disappearance of Bermeja Island could be part of a broader geopolitical narrative. For decades, the island played a key role in the delimitation of maritime borders between Mexico and the United States. Its location was crucial in determining the exclusive economic zones in the Gulf of Mexico, and its sudden disappearance left a significant void in the legal and diplomatic landscape of the region. Was it truly lost to nature? Or did its vanishing serve a more strategic purpose, perhaps to adjust the balance of power in the area? Such questions continue to fuel speculation and intrigue, making Bermeja's fate one of the most enigmatic chapters in the history of the Gulf. The role of cartographers and explorers in the early identification of Bermeja cannot be ignored. In the 16th century, the island was first documented in maps and reports by Spanish navigators, but there were no written descriptions to go along with these early depictions. This lack of first-hand accounts only adds to the mystery, leaving modern scholars to wonder whether Bermeja was misidentified or inaccurately depicted on early maps. Some even speculate that the island may have been a phantom landmass, born out of miscalculations or even a purposeful exaggeration to claim territorial rights. Adding to the intrigue, there is a fascinating connection between the disappearance of Bermeja Island and other similarly elusive landmasses in history. Many cultures have stories of mysterious islands that have come and gone, often leaving behind only myths and legends. The concept of lost lands and disappearing islands has long captured the human imagination, and Bermeja's story fits neatly into this broader pattern. Whether it was a real island or simply a ghost of geography, Bermeja belongs to a long tradition of places that defy explanation. Ultimately, the vanishing of Bermeja Island serves as a poignant reminder of the fragility of human knowledge. Despite centuries of exploration, mapping, and technological advancements, there are still vast areas of our planet that remain mysterious and elusive. Bermeja is not just an island lost to time. It is a symbol of the unknown, challenging our perceptions of what we think we understand about the world. As the Gulf of Mexico continues to be studied, one can only wonder, will we ever uncover the truth about Bermeja, or will it remain forever submerged in the deep waters of mystery? As we leave behind the enigmatic waters of the Gulf of Mexico, we now journey to a different realm of mystery, one that pulses with an eerie sense of the supernatural. It is the early 1800s, and our destination is the Caribbean island of Barbados, known for its beautiful beaches, rich history, and haunting folklore. In a small churchyard on this island, a strange and unsettling occurrence unfolded that would become one of the most perplexing and enduring mysteries of the region. Here, in the cool shade of the trees and amidst the solemn quiet of the cemetery, the legend of the moving coffins began. The story begins at the Christchurch Parish Cemetery, a place of final rest for generations of Barbadians. In the early 1800s, this cemetery was already home to many of the island's prominent citizens. The land was lush with overgrowth, the gravestones weathered by time, yet the peace of the resting souls would soon be disturbed by a chilling sequence of events. The mystery centered around a family, one whose name would be tied to the cemetery's inexplicable phenomena, the Chase family. It was in 1807 that the first of these strange incidents occurred. The head of the Chase family, a man named Thomas, had passed away and was buried in the Christchurch Parish Cemetery. His body was placed in a large wooden coffin and interred in a tomb. Nothing unusual happened at first. But several months later, Thomas's family returned to the tomb for a reason that was both routine and deeply unsettling. When they opened the tomb to place another body inside, they were horrified to discover that Thomas's coffin had moved, almost as if it had shifted from its original position. At first, the family assumed it was some kind of trick of the light, or perhaps the effect of the soil shifting. But as they inspected the tomb, they were faced with an even more unsettling discovery. The coffin lid had been moved. The coffin itself had been displaced and was found askew, as though it had been disturbed by some unseen force. This, however, was only the beginning. Over the next few years, reports of similar events began to surface. Coffins being moved from their resting places, some even found with their lids slightly ajar, as if they had been opened and closed by an unseen hand. The most unsettling part of the mystery came in 1812, when Thomas Chase's tomb was opened again. This time, the Chase family made a startling discovery. Not only had Thomas's coffin moved, but it had shifted in such a way that it seemed to have been deliberately positioned next to another coffin, that of a family member. This was not merely a case of disturbed earth or natural forces at work. There seemed to be a deliberate, eerie manipulation of the coffins. What was even more strange was that the coffins appeared untouched, as if the bodies inside had not decayed or deteriorated, despite the passage of time. As word of these strange events spread, the mystery grew. Local residents and visitors to the island were both baffled and frightened by the phenomenon. Some believed the coffins were being moved by supernatural forces, spirits of the dead, perhaps, trying to communicate with the living. Others considered more practical explanations. Could the coffins have been shifted by animals, perhaps large rodents or other creatures, burrowing through the cemetery in search of shelter? Or could the movement of the coffins be the result of human interference, vandalism perhaps, or grave robbing? But these theories failed to explain the odd details of the events. The coffins, for example, did not show signs of being tampered with by human hands or disturbed by animals. The lids of the coffins were found in positions that suggested something far more deliberate than accidental movements. And there was the question of the bodies inside. How could they have remained so intact and undisturbed after all these years? As the years passed, the mystery deepened. The Chase family, no longer able to accept rational explanations, turned to spiritualism for answers. Some speculated that the moving coffins were a sign of a curse placed on the Chase family, or perhaps a warning from the spirits of the dead. Others suggested that the phenomenon could be the work of a local priest or a secretive religious group practicing some form of ritual. But there was no definitive answer, and the phenomenon continued to elude any concrete explanation. One of the most peculiar aspects of the mystery is that, despite numerous attempts to investigate the events, no one was ever able to provide a solid, verifiable explanation. Even to this day, the moving coffins of Barbados remain a subject of fascination and debate. Some researchers have speculated that the coffins may have been affected by environmental factors, perhaps the high humidity or a sudden shift in temperature causing the wooden coffins to swell or contract, thereby making them appear to move. Yet this explanation remains far from satisfying, given the strange and deliberate manner in which the coffins seem to shift. Some even suggest that the phenomenon was tied to the psychological condition of the people involved, perhaps a case of mass hysteria or shared delusion. Could the Chase family have been so gripped by fear and superstition that they began to see movements where none existed? Or was there something more, something beyond our understanding, at play in that small corner of the Caribbean? The most intriguing theory, however, lies in the possibility that the moving coffins were a symbol of something deeper, a manifestation of the anxieties and fears of the time. The early 1800s in the Caribbean was a period of great upheaval, politically, socially, and economically. The legacy of colonialism, the rise of slave revolts, and the tension between European powers created a climate of uncertainty and fear. Could the strange events at Christchurch Parish Cemetery have been a collective response to these societal pressures, an expression of the islanders' dread and helplessness in the face of change? The mystery of the moving coffins of Barbados remains unsolved to this day. Over 2 centuries have passed since the first reports of the strange events, and yet no one can offer a definitive explanation. Was it the work of spirits, seeking to communicate with the living? Was it the result of natural forces, misinterpreted by frightened minds? Or was there something far more sinister at work, something that we are still unable to comprehend? As we walk away from the haunting whispers of the past, we are left with more questions than answers. The mystery of the moving coffins is not just a strange and unnerving tale from the past. It is a reminder that some things may never be fully understood, and that history, with all its unexplained phenomena, often leaves us with more to wonder about than we could ever hope to solve. What truths might still be hidden beneath the soil of that small Caribbean island, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves? As we journey away from the eerie stillness of the Caribbean, we find ourselves in the midst of a chilling enigma that stretches across the very heart of Europe. It is 1809, and we are on the fog-covered roads of Germany, amidst the turmoil and uncertainty of the Napoleonic Wars. Here, in the shadow of the conflict that would eventually reshape the continent, another mystery unfolds, one that defies explanation and remains unsolved to this very day. This is the story of the vanishing of Benjamin Bathurst. The location is a small village called Langensalza, nestled in the heart of Thuringia, where the roads were often filled with the sounds of marching soldiers, the clatter of hooves, and the occasional crack of distant artillery. It was late November, a time when the northern winds carried with them the bite of winter, and the dim light of dusk seemed to settle into the land earlier each evening. On November 9th, 1809, a British diplomat named Benjamin Bathurst was traveling across these very roads, returning to his post in Berlin after a visit to Vienna. Bathurst, a man of significance in his country's diplomatic circles, was not traveling alone. With him was his servant and 2 horses, the whole group making their way through the darkened countryside, making the long journey by carriage. The exact details of what happened next remain unclear. What we do know is this: as Bathurst's carriage made its way through the foggy night, it came to a stop near a small, isolated inn, one that, at first glance, seemed an unassuming way station along a quiet route. It was here, on a remote stretch of road, that Bathurst's journey would come to an inexplicable end. According to the accounts of Bathurst's companion, the diplomat decided to step out of the carriage, most likely to take in the crisp air or to stretch his legs after hours of travel. The servant remained in the carriage as Bathurst made his way across the road. But when the servant glanced up, the diplomat was gone, vanished into the night without a trace. The servant, confused and alarmed, searched the area but could find no sign of Bathurst. The fog, thick and oppressive, seemed to have swallowed him whole. Not a sound, not a footprint. The innkeeper and other witnesses would later corroborate the story, confirming that Bathurst had been seen briefly on the road, but beyond that, there was no indication of what happened to him. No evidence of a struggle, no signs of a kidnapping, no footprints leading off into the distance. Just the strange and unsettling fact that, in the span of a few moments, a man had disappeared from the face of the earth. As the days passed, the search for Bathurst intensified, though it was to no avail. The woods surrounding the inn were combed, the nearby villages questioned, and even the surrounding terrain was scoured for any trace of the missing diplomat. But nothing was found. The mystery deepened, and rumors began to take root. Some suggested that Bathurst had been the victim of foul play, that he had been abducted by either highwaymen or perhaps an enemy agent, working covertly during the chaos of the war. Others speculated that he had perhaps been the victim of a tragic accident, falling into a hidden ravine or being caught in a thick patch of underbrush that obscured his body from sight. But there was no evidence to support these theories, and the more the mystery deepened, the more bizarre the explanations became. One particularly strange theory suggested that Bathurst had simply vanished through some supernatural event, perhaps even a portal of sorts, an unexplained rift between dimensions. This theory was fueled in part by the eerie nature of the disappearance itself. A well-dressed, well-known man, seen by multiple witnesses, simply disappearing without a trace in a brief moment. It was as if the world itself had swallowed him up, leaving no evidence of his existence behind. Some conspiracy theorists suggested that Bathurst's disappearance was somehow tied to the political tensions of the time, a result of espionage or covert dealings between rival European powers. Had he discovered something that made him a target? Was he caught in the dangerous game of diplomacy, a pawn who had outlived his usefulness? Theories surrounding his disappearance multiplied, each one more far-fetched than the last, but none with any concrete evidence to support them. Adding to the enigma was Bathurst's background. He had been in Vienna, meeting with key players in the ongoing conflict, and was known to be carrying sensitive information with him. Had that information been the key to his vanishing? Was he the victim of a targeted operation, one that had resulted in him being taken and hidden away? It's a theory that, while it may sound plausible, has never been substantiated with any clear evidence. One possible explanation that has been considered by historians is that Bathurst had simply wandered off, perhaps lost in the dense fog, and was subsequently overcome by the harsh conditions. The roads of rural Germany in the early 19th century were treacherous, and it's possible that he wandered away from the safety of the inn, only to succumb to the cold or an unseen hazard. But this theory, while reasonable, doesn't account for the complete lack of any physical evidence. Not a single footprint, not a scrap of clothing, not even the slightest indication of where he had gone. As the years passed, the mystery of Benjamin Bathurst's disappearance faded from the forefront of public attention, though it never truly left the minds of those who remembered the eerie events. His case would be overshadowed by the increasing tensions of the Napoleonic Wars, and in the absence of answers, the enigma was relegated to the shadows of history, a reminder of just how easily a man can vanish. Yet, as we reflect on Bathurst's disappearance, the questions persist. Could a man truly disappear without a trace? Was his disappearance the result of something as simple as a tragic accident? Or was it something far more inexplicable, something tied to the mysteries of our world that still remain hidden? What forces, both seen and unseen, were at play that night on that lonely stretch of road in Germany? And what, if anything, do we truly understand about the frailty of human existence? The disappearance of Benjamin Bathurst remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of the 19th century. While theories abound, the true story of what happened to him, what force or circumstance caused him to vanish, remains just beyond our grasp. As we ponder these questions, we are reminded that, sometimes, history leaves us with more questions than answers, and that some mysteries may be destined to remain forever unsolved. As we leave behind the shadowy roads of early 19th century Germany, we turn our attention to a seemingly less sinister, yet equally curious episode in history. A story where the boundaries between fact and fiction blur in a most extraordinary way. This is the tale of the Great Moon Hoax, a peculiar episode in American media history that would captivate the public's imagination, raise questions about the nature of truth, and remain shrouded in intrigue for generations. The year was 1835. The place, New York City, the bustling, ever-growing metropolis that was fast becoming the heart of American culture, politics, and innovation. A city alive with energy, teeming with ships in its busy harbor and an increasing number of citizens eager for news from every corner of the world. In an age where communication was still slow and often limited to the printed page, newspapers had become the lifeblood of society. They were the essential source of information, shaping the public's view of the world and its endless mysteries. It was within this very framework that a story would emerge, one that would challenge everything readers thought they knew about science, exploration, and the very nature of reality. The Sun newspaper, a prominent publication based in New York, was enjoying widespread popularity. It was known for its sensational stories, those that dazzled the imagination and captured the attention of its readers. But in August of that year, a new type of tale began to appear in its columns, one that would not only stir the public, but would ultimately reveal the lengths to which some were willing to go in order to captivate their audience. The Great Moon Hoax began innocuously enough, appearing as a series of articles written under the banner Great Astronomical Discoveries. The articles, attributed to the fictional explorer and scientist Sir John Herschel, claimed to describe incredible findings made by Herschel during a recent scientific expedition to the moon. According to the story, Herschel had traveled to the southern tip of Africa and, from there, used a newly invented telescope to peer far beyond the stars, uncovering an entire civilization living on the moon. In this fantastical account, Herschel purportedly witnessed a moon teeming with life, strange creatures unlike any seen on Earth. These lunar inhabitants were described as bipedal, bat-winged humanoids, with the ability to communicate through a series of intricate songs and movements. Among the moon's population, there were various otherworldly species, including winged creatures that resembled large, bat-like humans, and peaceful, golden-furred beings who lived among the tall trees. The moon itself, Herschel reported, was a lush, green paradise, dotted with sparkling lakes and forests, an idyllic world far removed from the barren, gray sphere that had been so carefully observed by astronomers for centuries. What made these reports so striking were the level of detail and the vivid descriptions offered by the Sun's articles. They recounted the lives of these moon-dwelling creatures in such a way that many readers, mesmerized by the tales, believed them to be true. What was once a distant, cold body in the sky was now transformed into a thriving world filled with bizarre life forms and an alien society. The Sun's stories were more than just fanciful. They were deeply engaging, feeding the hunger for mystery and the desire to push the boundaries of human knowledge. For weeks, the public was enthralled. Some readers were delighted by the idea that another world could exist so close to their own. Others, more cautious, raised doubts, questioning the credibility of the accounts. But for most, the allure of the unknown was too strong to resist. The articles generated widespread discussion, sparking conversations in homes, taverns, and salons across the city. Yet, as with any great story, the truth began to emerge. It wasn't long before suspicions about the veracity of the Great Moon Hoax began to surface. Those with a scientific background quickly pointed out that the details presented in the articles were not just implausible, they were outright impossible. Sir John Herschel, it turned out, had never embarked on any such journey to the moon, nor did he have the means to observe extraterrestrial civilizations. His name had been exploited in a grand deception. In fact, there were no telescopes in existence at the time that could have made such observations. The ruse was eventually revealed to be a hoax, orchestrated by the Sun's editor, Richard Adams Locke. Locke had seen an opportunity to increase circulation and attract attention in an age when competition among newspapers was fierce. The fabricated moon stories, presented as serious scientific revelations, were simply too captivating to resist. The Sun had exploited the public's fascination with the unknown, with the new frontiers of space, and with the possibility of life beyond Earth, all of which were cutting-edge topics of scientific debate at the time. As the truth of the hoax came to light, there was a mixture of outrage and amusement. Many were angry at having been so thoroughly duped, while others were simply astonished by the audacity of the scheme. But perhaps most striking was the public's reaction to the idea that they had been so easily swept up in a fantastical narrative, a story that, despite its clear implausibility, had captivated their imaginations. In the years that followed, the Great Moon Hoax would become the subject of much discussion and reflection. Historians, journalists, and scientists would point to it as a clear example of the power of media to shape public perception, even when those perceptions were based on sheer fantasy. It became a cautionary tale about the dangers of blind trust in the media and the human tendency to believe what they wanted to believe. It also raised broader questions about the nature of truth and the role of the press in shaping society's understanding of the world. Yet, as we look back on the Great Moon Hoax today, there remains something almost enchanting about the way in which it captured the imagination of its audience. The hoax was more than just a scam. It was a manifestation of humanity's insatiable curiosity and desire to explore the unknown. Even in an era before space exploration, people were drawn to the possibility of life beyond Earth, to the mystery of what lay in the heavens. Perhaps, in some strange way, it reminds us of our eternal quest to find meaning in the stars, to search for answers to questions we may never fully comprehend. And so, as we reflect on the Great Moon Hoax, we are left with lingering questions. What does it say about the way we consume information, about the way stories are told and believed? How easily can we be swept up in a narrative that stretches the truth, sometimes in ways that seem utterly impossible? And in a world where we continue to look to the skies, what mysteries still lie beyond our reach, waiting to be discovered? The Great Moon Hoax may have been a fabricated story, but it remains a powerful reminder that the mysteries of the universe have always been, and will always be, an integral part of our human experience. As the years passed, the Great Moon Hoax continued to linger in the collective memory, often cited as one of the earliest examples of mass media manipulation. It was not just a story about a fantastical claim. It became a poignant reflection of the power media had in shaping public perception and belief. The hoax was a clear warning about how easily truth could be distorted, especially when there were no modern methods of fact-checking or instant communication to dispel the myth. In a way, it demonstrated that human nature, our desire for wonder and mystery, could sometimes cloud our judgment, leading us to accept even the most absurd tales if they tapped into our deepest curiosities. In modern times, the Great Moon Hoax serves as a curious precursor to the rise of sensationalized news, fake stories, and conspiracy theories. With the advent of the internet and social media, the world is constantly bombarded with stories, some true, many false, that play upon our emotional and psychological triggers. Like the readers of The Sun in 1835, we are now living in an age where we must exercise discernment and critical thinking, carefully navigating the flood of information that surrounds us. The story of the Great Moon Hoax is not just a historical curiosity. It is a timeless reminder of the importance of questioning what we read and ensuring that truth never takes a back seat to spectacle. Interestingly, the moon, once a symbol of mystery and the unknown, has since become a literal destination in human exploration. In the 1960s, the Apollo missions finally took humanity to the moon, turning the myths of the past into scientific reality. Yet, the legacy of the Great Moon Hoax remains, subtly reminding us that even in the most credible of scientific endeavors, the pursuit of knowledge is often accompanied by skepticism and wonder. The same fascination with the moon that drove people to believe in Herschel's moon-dwelling, bat-winged creatures also fueled our ambition to explore its surface, landing astronauts there less than a century after the hoax was perpetrated. As we transition from the curious tales of the past, we now find ourselves in the fog of a haunting, unresolved mystery from the early years of the 20th century. A story whose eerie nature has persisted through the decades. It's 1915, and the world is gripped by the tremors of war. While Europe burns in the flames of conflict, the skies above California remain unexpectedly quiet, untouched by the horrors of the Great War, or so it seemed. On the morning of August 16, 1915, the air was still, and the sea was calm off the coast of San Francisco Bay, a seemingly perfect day for a routine military training flight. But what happened that day would go on to haunt both the history of aviation and the collective imagination, an event whose unsettling details continue to provoke questions that remain unanswered. The scene is set just off the coast of California, in the expansive, open waters of the Pacific Ocean. A lone blimp, L8, drifts lazily across the sky. It's a German-made Zeppelin, part of a class of dirigibles newly acquired by the United States Navy. Designed for surveillance and reconnaissance, the L-class blimps were an impressive feat of engineering. With their long cylindrical bodies and enormous gas bags filled with flammable hydrogen, they were both a testament to the technological advances of the time and a clear symbol of the military's ambition to control the skies. On that fateful morning, L8, also known as the Ghost Blimp, set off on a routine patrol flight from its base at the Naval Air Station in Moffett Field. The mission was simple: to track enemy submarines off the coast. Blimps like L8 were stationed all along the American coastline, acting as surveillance vessels for spotting potential German U-boats, a growing threat in the war. The crew aboard L8 consisted of 2 men, Lieutenant Ernest DeWitt Cody, the pilot, and Ensign Charles Adams, his observer. It should have been a typical mission, a routine operation with no cause for concern. But things began to go awry almost immediately. By midday, L8 was nearing the end of its patrol route when something extraordinary happened. The blimp, without any apparent reason, began to drift off course. Rather than continuing its steady flight path back to base, it began to veer in an odd, uncommanded direction, back towards the coast of San Francisco. No one on the ground at Moffett Field or in the surrounding areas knew it at the time, but something was amiss. As L8 drifted over the water, radio operators at Moffett Field attempted to reach the crew, but they received no response. The blimp, eerily silent, continued its erratic course. Then, at some point around noon, the blimp was seen drifting closer to the shore, a curious sight for those watching from the beach below. Suddenly, it became clear that something was terribly wrong. L8, though still afloat, was completely unresponsive to the crew's commands. And then, in a bizarre twist, it made a sharp descent and came to rest, right in the middle of a field near Daly City, just a few miles from San Francisco. What happened next was nothing short of strange. The blimp landed gently in the field, its tail resting just above the ground. When emergency responders and military personnel rushed to the scene, they found L8 in a state of complete disarray. The crew, Lieutenant Cody and Ensign Adams, were nowhere to be found. The blimp, though intact, had no signs of damage or distress. It had been fully functional, yet the 2 men had seemingly vanished into thin air. The question on everyone's lips was immediate. Where had the crew gone? The scene was perplexing. Neither Cody nor Adams was found within the blimp, and neither had left any trace of their presence. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of injury, and no indication that anything extraordinary had taken place aboard the dirigible. The only thing that stood as a clue to what may have happened was a strange, faint smell of ether inside the blimp, but no clear explanation emerged for the absence of the men. Their disappearance left more questions than answers. As the investigation continued, it was revealed that the blimp itself had been operating in near-perfect condition. It was well maintained, fully fueled, and mechanically sound. There was no indication of a technical failure or any other cause for the mysterious incident. And yet, with the crew nowhere to be found and no clear explanation in sight, the case quickly began to take on the air of a strange, ghostly event. The press, of course, seized upon the mystery with zeal, dubbing the incident the Ghost Blimp disappearance. Was it possible that the 2 men had somehow been caught in a freak accident, forced to bail out in midair? Could they have suffered from some sort of mental breakdown or experienced a severe medical emergency that caused them to abandon the blimp? Some speculated that they might have been captured or killed by enemy agents, though this theory didn't hold up, as there was no sign of a struggle or sabotage. Others began to spin more fantastical theories. Could the blimp have been haunted, some wondered? Was there an unexplained paranormal force at work? Could the missing crew members have vanished into thin air? Perhaps there was a more mundane explanation, one that involved miscommunication, negligence, or even foul play. But the facts were elusive, and the theories continued to pile up, each more speculative than the last. For years, the disappearance of Cody and Adams remained a puzzle. Despite numerous investigations, there was never any clear explanation for what had happened to the two men. Eventually, the case was filed away, its strange and unsolved nature becoming just another entry in the growing list of military mysteries from the early years of aviation. And yet, even today, the tale of the Ghost Blimp continues to linger in the minds of those fascinated by aviation history and unsolved mysteries. It's a story that haunts not only the air over the Pacific, but also the collective memory of an era on the cusp of monumental technological change. The disappearance of Lieutenant Cody and Ensign Adams is often cited as one of the greatest aviation mysteries, the unresolved nature of their fate only adding to its eerie allure. Some wonder if there might still be more to this case, if perhaps a hidden explanation awaits discovery. Was it an accident? A cover-up? Or was something else, something far stranger, at work that day? The disappearance of the crew of L8 remains unsolved, and as the years pass, the mystery deepens. What truly happened to Cody and Adams on that strange August day? Were they victims of a twisted accident? Or was there something far darker that remains hidden in the mists of time? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere between the known and the unknown, just beyond our grasp. As we look back on the events of 1915, one thing is certain. The ghost of the blimp and the unanswered questions that surround it continue to linger in the air like a forgotten shadow. As the years passed and new generations of aviation enthusiasts and historians delved into the case, some began to question whether the mystery of L8 had ever been fully investigated. Could there have been a cover-up? Perhaps the military, eager to maintain a perfect image of their cutting-edge technology, had intentionally suppressed evidence that could have explained the bizarre disappearance. Speculations ran rampant, with theories ranging from the possibility of enemy sabotage to the crew suffering from a bizarre collective amnesia brought on by stress or exposure to toxic fumes from the blimp's hydrogen. Even more unsettling, some suggested the involvement of secret military experiments, perhaps involving experimental weapons or nerve agents that had never been disclosed to the public. The faint smell of ether inside the blimp lingered as one of the few tangible clues, but was it enough to indicate that something sinister was at play? Many questioned whether the disappearance could have been part of something larger, an operation so secret that it was buried in the annals of history, never to be fully revealed. The Ghost Blimp's legacy continues to intrigue not only aviation buffs, but also those who are captivated by the strange and unexplained. As the decades slip by, theories surrounding the mysterious disappearance have only grown more elaborate. But despite all the speculation, the truth about the fate of Lieutenant Cody and Ensign Adams remains elusive, their story becoming part of the great tapestry of unsolved mysteries that define the early 20th century. What truly happened on that fateful day in 1915? Perhaps it is a mystery that will never be solved, lingering like the phantom of L8 itself, forever hovering just out of reach.